Check, 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 check.
Testing, 1, 2, 3.
All right. Good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining us at our transportation meeting today. I'm going to go through a couple of quick things. First of all, I'd like to acknowledge we're on the land of the Abenaki Nation. We do have regrets from Councillor DeRoche. He is busy with some other city business today. But at this point, I'll ask our fabulous coordinator, Rosa, to do a roll call.
Councillor Bradley?
Here.
Councillor DeRose?
Here.
Councillor DeRoche? Councillor Devine?
Hello.
Councillor Dudas?
Present.
Councillor Gower?
Here.
Councillor Johnson? Good morning. Councillor Lowe? Councillor Luloff?
Present.
Councillor Troster?
Here.
Vice Chair Kitts?
Here.
And Chair Tierney.
Here, and just to let you know, Councillor Lowe just texted me. He'll be a couple minutes late, but he certainly will be attending today. So first of all, notices meeting information regarding participants of public. No declarations of interest to date. A confirmation of minutes Thursday, the 28th of September, 2023. Are these carried? Great. I'll go through the rest of the agenda clearing. Responses to inquiry. I believe Councillor Troster got hers about accessibility impacts. Financial Services Department, we have our 2024 draft operating and capital budget. We do have a presentation. Our staff have worked very hard on it, so I want to thank you for that. So we'll just hold that item, as well as Vice Chair Kitts also does have the roadmap and adding the budget document to the agenda. Rosa, at what point should we add that in, when we get back to the item after agenda clearing, or should we deal with that now? We'll come back to that after the agenda clearing. That's a good idea. Thank you. So I'll skip to, we do have another item on the agenda. Item number 6. I want to thank our Public Works Department. They've worked very hard on this. You've probably read the memo. They did a terrific job the last couple of years. Every year I feel our winter standards, and Quentin and the whole group does a terrific job. We don't actually have any delegations. We do have a slide presentation if people see the necessity of having that. But I know that they've worked and spoken with every member of council and committee. Do we see a need to hold this item for any kind of presentation, or is that item carried? Carried. Thank you very much. And I want to give a big thank you to Q and team. We're very excited. There's a lot of new little nuggets in there this year, and let's pray for no snow because that's obviously. Please do.
I just want to recognize Quentin and the winter maintenance team for agreeing to shovel the stairs on the Flora footbridge and the Corktown Bridge. I cannot tell you how much delight that is bringing to people, and it just shows that a couple simple actions can make a really huge difference in terms of pedestrian access. So thank you.
Yes, I echo that, and thank you. They're always finding new ways to help us out, and I think it's a big kudos to that department in general, where we see resiliency being a big part of what we're doing, and why we've seen in the draft budget an increase again to ensure we keep our sidewalks clean, our cycling lanes clean, our roadways clean. So thank you on that. Item 6.2, the Strategic Road Safety Action Plan. We don't have a presentation. We have no correspondence or speakers on this. I think staff have met with most people. I think we're really here for 2 items today, and I don't see this one being one, but is it a quick question, or did you want to hold the item and put it onto the agenda? Oh, go say thank you. That's good.
Yeah, so similarly, I'm very excited about a lot of the content in the road safety action plan. There's going to be a speed policy review. There's also something for looking at a system whereby we can track speeds along corridors, which is a very exciting development that we might need the province to help us with. But instead of a point in time, measuring a car as it enters and exits corridors. So for many of us wards that are seeing a lot of speed racing down long drags, this could be a really exciting development for us to incentivize better behavior. So I just really can't wait till next year and seeing the results of all this great work. So thank you.
Great, and thank you for that. I echo that. They've done a tremendous job. on a lot of the marketing and getting that messaging out there too. So I appreciate that. So on item 6.2, is that item carried? On item number 7, the Nesbit Street encroachment agreement, we do have some delegations that I kindly met in the elevator coming up here today. We had a great conversation, so we'll hold that item. We have item number 8, Office of the City Clerk, status update, Transportation Committee inquiries and motions for the period ending November 6, 2023, administrative, blah, blah, blah. We have no presentations and we have no delegations or speakers on that specific item. Is this item carried? Great, thank you. And councillors' items, this will be funny because I don't even know if Leaper's online here, but oh, he is there. I was going to carry this and torment you, but we'll see because it's at the will of committee. So item 9.1, Councillor Leaper, installation of always stop control at the intersection of Spencer and Huron. There's no presentation, no correspondence, and no speakers on this item. Very contentious. Is this item carried? Did you want to have a vote on this, anyone? Is this carried? Carried. You're lucky on that one, Jeff. Oh, another one. Here we go. Councillor 9.2, Councillor Leaper, Wellington Village, 30 km/h gateway speed signage. We have no presentations, no correspondence or speakers. Is this item carried? There you go, Jeff. Congratulations.
Thanks all. Have a good meeting.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks. Item 9.3, Councillor Kavanaugh, implementation of the 38 km/h gateway speed limit in Belltown. There's no presentations, no correspondence or speakers. Is this item carried? Great. And we have item number 9.4, Councillor Dudas, East End colleague, installation of protected left turn phase at the intersection of Innis and Disnu. No presentation, no correspondence, no speakers. Is this item carried? Great. Thank you very much, committee. So on that, I'm going to go back to the first item, which I think we're here to talk about today, which is presentation related to, just give me one quick second here. Okay, we got our wonderful staff here to talk about our draft budget that will be moving ahead as we speak to our communities. There's so many people here. I will go ahead and let them all introduce themselves because there's so many people here. If you don't know, transportation is one of the most popular committees because we have so many departments and what keeps the city moving. So at this point, I'll let them tee up their presentation. Then we'll go ahead. We'll go ahead and put up on the screen at this point. If Vice Chair Kitts will add in the document. Thank you for keeping me in line, Vice Chair Kitts.
Whereas the 2024 draft operating and capital budget documents for the Transit Commission were circulated and published after being tabled at Council on November 8th, 2023, which was after the Transportation Committee agenda publication date. And therefore be it resolved that pursuant to subsection 89.3 of the procedure bylaw, the Transportation Committee add the budget documents to the agenda.
Great, and thank you for that. And just as we're preparing to put up the slides, just before that, I hate to jump around the agenda, but there's a minor one on the agenda clearing I kind of forgot about, is item number 12.1, the motion about the Barrhaven Center Park and Ride lot removal. This is staff supported. Councillor Lowe's worked with staff on this one to save time so we can focus on our 2 items that are on the agenda. Is this item carried? Okay, so when Councillor Lowe comes here, torment him and say we have lots of delegations and we haven't done anything, but we have carried that one. So we'll go back to city staff at this point, and thank you for all your great work. The floor is yours.
That's great. Thank you, Chair. And good morning to members of the Transportation Committee. My name is Quentin Levesque, Director of Roads and Parking Services. I'm pleased to be with you today to deliver the draft 2024 budget. I would like to introduce my colleagues who will be presenting with me today. Cyril Rogers, General Manager, Finance and Corporate Services and Chief Financial Officer. Lila Gibbons, Director of Fleet Services. BV Chi, Director of Transportation Planning. and Susan Johns, Director of Asset Management Services in the Infrastructure Water Services Department. Voici notre programme d'aujourd'hui. Survol de budget.
Our agenda today will be to go through the draft budget and to present it to the Transportation Committee. We'll talk about investments, but in the key segments in 2024, which are linked or aligned with council priorities. So we'll talk about continue ongoing improvements, and there will be a question period. Now I'd like to give the floor to my colleague.
Thank you, Quentin, and good morning, members of the committee. Can you go to the next, probably go to slide 3. Next slide. Thank you. So today we'll give you a high-level overview of the total Transportation Committee budget. Overall, there's just over $750 million in the transportation's budget. $456 million for the capital related projects and $295 for the operating related budget. There are over 100 projects listed in the Transportation Committee budget book, all with the details behind those. From a climate lens perspective, which was new that we introduced in the 2023 budget as a reminder, and further enhancements that we've done in this budget, there's approximately 73 projects where we identify some level of direct, moderate, high, medium, low type impact to climate change. So those investments, total close to $400 million in terms of contribution towards improving our climate change initiatives at the city. We do have just shy of 1,200 employees in the various services within this committee, and we're seeing an increase of 9 FTEs in this budget. 2 are in traffic services for support of the automated speed enforcement program, and the other 7 are related to fleet services. 1 is recovered directly from warranty. So we do have a resource there focusing on warranty related items. And the other 6 are basically converting some temporary mechanics to full-time mechanics in support of the solid waste program. Next slide, please. Overall, this is basically the different services that you'll see in this budget. It's basically a year-over-year comparison in terms of the growth. For the most part, excluding roads, most of the services are mainly increasing by that 2 to just over 2%, which mainly reflects the compensation related impacts for those services areas. If you look at traffic services, they are not going up by 2%, but one of the drivers there is there's $1.4 million worth of efficiencies in the traffic services budget related to energy savings as part of the streetlight LED conversion that's in the final stages. When you look at parking services, the parking services is fully recovered from parking related revenue on off-street revenue. That's why you see a net requirement of 0. That is fully funded through the parking revenues as per the municipal parking strategy. Road services is increasing by 6.3%. Again, the budget for roads winter operations is increasing to 92.5%. So we have some additional growth, just over $1 million, $1.2 million for growth. And then, of course, inflation on our contracts when we look at our various contracts and contractor services and materials such as salt. Next slide, please. On the capital side, so just shy of $455 million capital budget, mainly on the renewal side, just over $340 million for renewal, mainly in the roads area. Some of the highlights that I would like to bring, as I mentioned at tabling last week, we are increasing the sidewalk budget. In 2023, we introduced a new program, which was a minor sidewalk repair program. That was $1 million per year for the term. In this budget, we bumped that to $2 million. So we've increased that. So we doubled it, which is a significant increase in allocation towards improving what we heard from our residents and what we heard from councillors. When we look at the growth, in this budget, we also have the Green Bank realignment. There's $20 million in 2024, with another 20 in 2025 as we kind of phase out the Green Bank realignment program. And then the residual is basically $9 million for some minor enhancement type projects. I'll now pass it over to Lila to discuss the fleet services budget.
Next slide, please. Thank you, Cyril. So as you'll see from this slide, fleet services is in line with the term of council priority, a city that is green and resilient. As part of our 2024 fleet vehicle and equipment replacement and growth plan, we have approximately $4.6 million identified to support the continued transition of the municipal fleet to a low carbon fleet. Le plan de remplacement prévoit le remplacement de 43.
We are providing for the replacement of 43 vehicles by hybrid or electric vehicles so the staff are currently looking at whether some of the new vehicles available will meet the needs of the city.
We'll have 241 green units in service, which includes 60 fully electric units and 181 hybrid units. So next, throughout 2023, Fleet Services has been working on developing our municipal green fleet strategy. This strategy will better position the city to meet the targets set out in the city's climate change master plan and remain in closer alignment with the models presented in Energy Evolution. It will serve as a comprehensive long-term roadmap that will consider the market conditions, education, training, procurement, monitoring, and the required infrastructure to support the transition to a low-carbon fleet. Once completed, we will be bringing the municipal green fleet strategy to committee and council in 2024. Finally, we'll be putting more focus on reducing idling of municipal vehicles throughout 2024. Through the fleet service review, we have set the target of reducing idling by 70%. This will result in an approximate reduction of 370 tons of GHG emissions annually. Next slide, please. So now I'll speak to a few of the highlights from the work that has been happening through our fleet transformation and our fleet service review, where we are forecasting approximately $6.3 million in savings in 2024 that will be reinvested into city operations. The first initiative is standardization and right-sizing of municipal vehicles. Nous travaillons avec nos partenaires pour identifier.
We're working with our partners to identify those parts of the city that use vehicles, and we're looking at the goal of the use as well. At the end of that exercise, we will set standards. This will allow us to make sure that we have the right vehicles of the right size, the right type, and that we have the necessary vehicles for our operations. It will also allow us to move the vehicles around from one service zone to the next to simplify the request process and to improve effectiveness and efficiency. It will also allow us to better manage our parts inventory.
Up to 100 units. In order to ensure that we can meet this target, working closely with the service areas across the city, we are reviewing the low usage, motor pool, rental and leased vehicles, equipment and attachments to identify what units can be returned for disposal. Through this initiative, we are forecasting an approximate efficiency of $2 million, which will result from revenues collected from the disposal of units, reduction in maintenance costs, and the reduction in monthly rental and lease costs. Moving to our ReLife program. In 2023, we piloted our first grader ReLife program. The 3 graders that were part of this pilot were at the end of their useful life, and by doing a full replacement of the engine, some of the components, repairs to the steel structure, and repainting the unit, we've extended the life of these units by 10 to 12 years and saved approximately $300,000 per unit by not having to purchase brand new. The 2024 replacement plan will see 6 graders going through the ReLife program for an approximate savings of $1.8 million. Also in 2024, we're looking at a pilot of solid waste packer box ReLife program. Just an FYI, the packer box is actually the box that sits on the truck frame or the chassis that collects the garbage. So this came as a result of reviewing maintenance data, where we saw increased maintenance cost in year 3 and moving into year 4 of their usage. So currently we are investigating the potential benefits of a proactive midlife refurbishment program on packer boxes during year 3, which should minimize future maintenance costs and decrease vehicle downtime. So finally, through telematics, M5 and other sources, we have a lot of data at our fingertips. Through 2023 and into 2024, we will continue to create tools such as our Power BI reports that will enable fleet services and our partners across the city to shift to a data-informed decision-making mindset. Now I'll turn the mic back over to Quentin.
That's great. Thank you, Lila. Next slide, please. As part of the continuous improvements, parking services will continue the implementation of public bike parking strategy, and as referenced on the previous slide, will be investing in more secure bike parking. Additionally, as part of the service review, parking services will be reviewing parking rates to ensure alignment with the municipal parking management strategy. With parking demand now relatively stable following the pandemic, this will involve the implementation of the rate setting guidelines to account for the inflationary impacts in our on-street rates, the implementation of the on-street demand-based pricing model, and complete a review of evening and weekend parking. Raising the maximum rates as part of the budget will not result in any immediate changes, but will provide staff with the flexibility to move forward with these initiatives. Additionally, information will be provided to committee and council in early 2024 prior to implementing any changes. Next slide, please. Parking Services is putting pressures forward to enable investment in a city that is green and resilient, and a city that is more connected with reliable, safe, and accessible mobility options. In alignment with the Municipal Act, any spending from parking fee revenues has to relate to the municipal parking management strategy and be connected to parking. In recent years, this has been expanded to include things such as bike parking citywide and EV charging infrastructure. These investments will continue in 2024 and also be highlighted as investments towards ensuring that our public parking facilities are as safe and secure as possible. Next slide, please. In terms of continuous improvement, as part of the Winter Maintenance Quality Standards Review, roads will be continuing with improvements made through service delivery review with a proactive and aggressive approach to winter maintenance on sidewalks and residential roads. This includes 24/7 sidewalk coverage, regular communications with councillors and stakeholders, providing accessibility training to staff. This year we did create a new video for our winter operators, and continuing alternative starting points for residential roads that will ensure the same street isn't plowed first or last during every snow event. And lastly, expanding on the use of GPS technology to share with councillors. In terms of the service review, Road Services will be supporting finance and corporate services with the client experience review. Next slide, please. Road Service is putting a budget pressure forward for growth of 1.2 million, which will go toward core maintenance activities through internal and contracted resources. A total draft 2024 budget for some of these activities include an increase in winter operations to 92.5 million, an increase to sidewalk maintenance to 3.75 million, and an increase in pothole repairs to 11.4 million. Next slide, please. Traffic will also be quite involved in the service review process. It'll be co-leading the temporary traffic calming funding program service review with transportation planning within the Planning, Real Estate, and Economic Development Department. The objectives of the review include reviewing temporary and permanent traffic calming programs to decrease overlap and streamline services, finding efficiencies in existing and expanding programs, and providing councillors with more options of permanent and temporary measures to consider to address traffic calming needs. Through this initiative, we anticipate enhancing services while gaining potential cost savings. We also anticipate gaining various types of efficiencies and creating capacity to focus efforts where they're needed most. Traffic Services will also be a stakeholder in a number of other service review initiatives, including the monetization of potential telecom assets service review, as there could be opportunities to monetize streetlights as a vertical asset with 5G technologies, the client experience review to help define client needs and leverage technology to provide a better resident and employee experience, and the energy retrofits program service review, given ongoing work to convert decorative and cold style right-of-way lighting to LED. Next slide, please. Traffic Services also delivers a number of services that align in this term of council's priorities. The city is a more connected with reliable and safe, accessible mobility options. Example of these services, along with city investments, include ASE speed cameras, 2.4 million in the 2024 draft budget for the implementation of 20 additional speed cameras in 2024. With these new cameras, there will be 60 citywide by the end of 2024. Pedestrian crossovers, $557,000 in 2024 draft budget to implement pedestrian crossovers at locations that meet warrants and feasibility requirements. In the area of temporary traffic calming, the draft 2024 budget includes funding for the temporary traffic calming to increase the annual ward budget to $75,000 for each ward. Lastly, the road safety action plan. The draft budget includes $20.5 million to implement measures under 4 emphasis areas of road safety action plan: vulnerable road users, intersections, rural area, and high-risk driver behaviors. Road safety culture is also addressed through the plan with educational initiatives and a communication strategy targeting the 4 emphasis areas. The capital account is allocated from road safety reserve, funded by reserves from speed cameras, excuse me. Further details on the spending plan for the $20.5 million are included in the 2024 Road Safety Action Plan annual report that has been tabled at today's committee meeting. Lastly, the adult school crossing guard. $4.2 million are included in the draft budget for the ASCG program. This program funds the existing 286 guards with 10 new guards for the 2024-2025 school season and in the school pedestrian safety presentations. I will now pass the presentation over to Vivi Chi to present highlights from transportation planning.
Thank you. Next slide, please. Transportation planning's annual capital budgets allow staff to continue with the delivery of several council-approved transformative programs. For the next year, we are requesting over $14 million in new spending to plan, design, and build sidewalks and cycling infrastructure. This amount is a collection of several programs, including major structures, missing links, and development sidewalks. To plan and implement permanent traffic calming measures on local and collector streets, we are seeking nearly $2.6 million. Over $19.5 million is tagged for the intersection control measures and network modifications programs, which help improve mobility primarily at intersections, and it's to buy us time before major expenditures are required for road widenings. These improvements not only relate to capacity, but also safety, because protected intersections are part of the project scope. Over $4 million is for corridor protection and other planning studies to support the TMP. As you know, the TMP update is currently underway. $13.4 million is for Robert Grant, a new road that will address access for new developments, and it too will be designed with complete street principles. Nearly $20.2 million for Green Bank Road widening and realignment to serve the growing community of Barrhaven South. This project will need multi-year funding, and the funds collected to date, including the 2024 request, will allow for the investigation of early incremental implementation options. Over $1.6 million is our contribution to the Albert Street Revitalization Project to improve sidewalks and cycling facilities. And finally, the last bullet there, $2.6 million is for the design of 3 priority public realm projects in the Byward Market that Council reaffirmed in June of this year. The projects are for pedestrianizing William Street, optimizing the use of the Byward Market Square and its streetscaping, creating a new destination building at 70 Clarence, currently a public parking garage. The Byward Market public realm projects are led by Court Curry's team from Right of Way, Heritage, and Urban Design. So with that, I now pass the presentation over to Sue Johns.
Thank you, Vivi. Good morning, committee. Infrastructure, can I have the next slide, please? Thank you. Infrastructure and water services are responsible for programs that are connected to service review and continuous improvement. And these are a few highlights related to transportation portfolio. Improvements are planned to the flusher hydrant program to improve the service to our permit holders. We'll be launching in early 2024. We're having continuing investment in the pavement preservation program that extends pavement life before its end of life. We have ongoing assessment of the condition and performance of the city's infrastructure assets, including pavements, structures, sidewalks, buildings, parks, water mains, and sewers, and a data management ongoing work to support the city's asset management system and enable evidence-based decision-making within a risk management framework. Next slide, please. Infrastructure and water services, transportation responsibility support the term of council priorities towards a city that is more connected with reliable, safe mobility options. I'll remind you that the City of Ottawa owns over $70 billion in existing infrastructure assets, and that the total renewal program proposed in the 2024 budget exceeds $600 million. 98.7 million is directed to road rehabilitation, including road resurfacing, geotechnical investigations, installation of guide rails, rural road upgrades, and preservation treatments. $76.5 million of this amount is for road resurfacing. The rehab program improves the driving surfaces of Ottawa's roadways, which support transit vehicles as well as cycling. Often, the program includes local repairs to curbs and sidewalks and accessibility improvements where we can as part of the resurfacing program. Next slide, please. This slide provides a few highlights, from the list of what the investment in transportation infrastructure is. As I mentioned before, the road resurfacing totals $76.5 million, which includes the $30 million investment that was announced in the mayor's budget speech. A few roads are here. The complete list is found in pages 63 to 65 of the budget binder. We have $38.7 million invested in bridges and structures. The full list of structures is on pages 121 and 122. $10.87 million is proposed for the renewal of sidewalks and pathways. This includes the extra $1 million Cyril mentioned earlier from the mayor's investments. The complete list of sidewalks and pathways is found on pages 111 to 113. In addition to these itemized lists by asset type, there is investment in $32.2 million of transportation network investments like these roads and sidewalks and pathways that are part of the integrated renewal program. The project list for integrated projects is found on page 23, and details of each of the projects start on page 49. This concludes the staff presentation. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Great. Thank you very much. Tremendous work by staff. And just before we move along, I forgot in my excitement to ask Vice Chair Kitts move the motion to add this to the agenda. Is that item carried? And of course, how we're going to proceed. We're looking, and I'm looking at our committee coordinator. No one fall off your chairs. Do we have any delegations to speak on this today? We don't have delegations, which is a testament to the great work our staff has done. So thank you very much for that. But now you're going to have to face questions from councillors. I'm sure they'll all be terrific. So at this point, I'll move to committee members first and any other members that do have questions to staff. And then after completion of that, we'll move to the roadmap. If there's a specific item within the roadmap that wants to be held versus making our poor Vice Chair Kitts read every single item, maybe we can just go explicitly to that. But I feel overall, after speaking to committee members, we're pretty satisfied. Then we can go on to our final agenda item today. So we have a lot of hands up here. We'll start with Councillor Gower.
Thanks, Chair. Thank you for the presentation. I just wanted to start with three quick things on the capital budget. When we see below cutoff, for example, new traffic control devices and intersection control measures, how do you determine what's below cutoff? How do you prioritize that?
Through you, Chair. So for the new traffic control signal program, we prioritize every location. We look at collisions as the primary one in terms of priority. And so that's how we rank the ones above and below. And again, as funding comes along, those locations tend to go up. We are supplementing some of this funding for this program through the Road Safety Action Plan as well to help accelerate the installation of these warranted locations.
Okay. 2024 development sidewalks for the design and construction of sidewalk linkages that cannot be secured from developments. I won't read the whole thing, but do you already have a list of those projects, or is it just to have that funding available in case issues come up over the course of the year?
Councillor, we do For instance, for this year, Gemini Way is on the list, but it's also an account where things pop up as well. It doesn't get a lot of funding, but this year it's about 183,000, but that's what we use that for.
Okay, thank you. And just notice in the transit priority network items, there are a number of years that have unspent cash balances, including going back to 2017, 2018. Can you just explain why we're seeing unspent cash balances or what that means?
Yes, because we finished the planning work, so we're relying on some of these already approved authority, the budgets, so that we can start implementing them. There are a number of projects. I have the list, so I just have to quickly look for them here. But they are all accounted for because there are roadworks, they're fairly expensive. So it's like all the other major roadworks, it's multi-year funding.
So it's not that they're delayed, it's just that the planning and construction takes place over a number of years.
That's correct.
Okay. Okay, thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Committee Member Troster.
Thank you so much. Knowing that we had a deficit of $19 million from winter operations last year, I know I perhaps should have asked this question within the context of the winter quality maintenance standards. But I'm wondering if you could, we're seeing more extreme weather, we're seeing more snow. We know that our climate patterns are changing. Should we not just be budgeting more for winter maintenance? Because we seem to have these record snowfalls every year.
Through the chair. So it's a great question. So what we do is we look at 3, 5, 10-year averages. And if I look back at in 2020, we had a $2.6 million surplus. 2021, we had a $2.9 million surplus. 2022, we did have a 5.8 deficit. First half this year was a bit more extreme. So we kind of look at our budget every year when we build the budget. We look at those historical averages as well to kind of true it up. In this budget, the budget is going up to $92.5 million. That's a $10 million increase from 2022. So that's a significant increase. It's hard to speculate what climate change is. If you look at some of the, farmers' almanacs or weather predictions, some would suggest that we're going to have less snowfall, more milder winters. That does present challenges to the operations for Quinton in terms of freezing rain and rain. So that dynamic is changing. So it's very hard and fluid to kind of pin mark what the exact number is. But we do it every year, and we manage that every year, and we look at it every variable as we can throughout the year.
So what would trigger a more permanent increase on a year-by-year basis? Is it something like a 5-year weather pattern, or I'm just concerned because it was a really big deficit this year.
So through chair, I would need to see at least what I would consider a financial good indicator. So I would like to see a consistent 2 to 3 years. But of course, if there's other challenges outside of the weather, we're also seeing in 2021, 22, 23 is the supply chain inflationary impacts as well. Inflation is coming back down, not as fast as we hope. But even if I go back to, I have a lot of data here, if I go back to 2014 timeframe, we ended with a $24 million deficit, right? So we slowly increased over time, as opposed to just saying, here you go, here's $100 million without any fiscal restraint, if you will. So we work closely with Quinton and the Lance team to make sure we kind of manage that along. And then I take that risk overall from the global city budget in terms of, okay, how can I dial back some of the other areas to kind of preserve that spending? This year, I have a discretionary spending freeze, kind of dial back some of our hiring where it wasn't operationally impacted to kind of mitigate those risks.
Okay, great. So when we have a bad year like last year, where does the money come from? Just from our reserves, or?
Through the chair. So in most years, last year, we were able to basically mitigate most of the winter operations deficit. The challenge we had last year, we did finish last year overall with a $6 or $7 million deficit. Don't quote me on that number. Lots of numbers in my head. But the biggest driver of last year's deficit wasn't winter operations. It was a Direcco. We had $20 million worth of Direcco costs. If you look at the $6 million of deficit in winter operations, $26 million, we finished the year with about a $7 million deficit plus or minus. So we have a lot of levers where we really tighten up the purse strings, if you will, to help that. Again, if I see a consistent routine, we always can go back to our tax stabilization reserve. Don't like to touch that. But if I do see that trending of 2 to 3 years where the budget continues to, the actuals continue to exceed the budget, we kind of give it a one-time top up.
That's great. I have a question about secure bike parking, because I know, so when you refer to secure bike parking, are you referring to a box, like a Or are you just referring to a typical?
Yeah, through the chair. Thanks for the question, Councillor. I'm going to ask Scott Caldwell to respond to that question.
Chair, thank you, Councillor. So in 2022, we started an investment in secure bike parking, and the modules which we have started with are boxes that are about 9 feet by 8 feet, and they fit 6 bikes, and they're accessed by app, right? So you can start a session and end a session and have your bike secured during that time.
That's great. Now, I know that you were searching for a place to be able to put one in my ward, in Somerset Ward, which perhaps has the highest rate of cycling. We weren't able to find one. So I'm just wondering what the criteria are and whether you think we need to expand that criteria, because bike theft is one of the #1 issues I hear about in the neighborhood. And it's a real, it really deters people from cycling quite often.
Absolutely, Chair. So our priority is to find locations specifically in the central area, specifically where there's a high employment density, so we can make the best use of these. We, as part of the 3 bike lockers that we purchased initially, one is slated for Somerset Ward. We haven't had the opportunity to install it yet. It's going to be located in our public parking garage at 210 Gloucester, but there's some pending life cycle work, and we didn't want to install it and have to take it out. And so we expect that installation to occur in 2024. And as part of moving forward, we will be looking to expand by additional locations. And the difficulty is the size of the lockers and finding an appropriate space, but we are optimistic that we'll be able to find 2 to 3 more locations, and Somerset Ward will be a priority.
That's great. Okay, one more short question before I go back on this. So in terms of sidewalk repair, so I'm very glad to see that there's more money in there for sidewalks. What often happens in my ward in some of the older neighborhoods is, I reported a stretch of sidewalk in front of McNabb Community Center where there were just absolute giant craters in it. And I was getting a lot of complaints about very, very dangerous. And of course, staff came in and filled it with hot patches of asphalt, which now looks rather comical. I'm not going to lie. I'm just wondering what the trigger is to just replace a section of sidewalk rather than continually patching it, because I have to say it's sort of a constant source of amusement / frustration among residents when they see what really looks like a patchwork job on a sidewalk. But if the entire street is not slated to be done, I'm just wondering what triggers a replacement of a section that's really patched up.
Yeah, through the chair. Thank you for the question, Councillor. So every year, road services staff do conduct a survey of our sidewalk network to identify discontinuities or deficiencies in the sidewalk. And we do classify those based on level of hazard per our provincial maintenance quality standards, as well as our council approved maintenance quality standards, obviously focusing on the hazards that are more severe. And in a lot of cases that requires different types of repairs. It could be asphalt patching. It could be cutting of lips that are high on the sidewalk, in addition to replacing sidewalk panels. So really, we prioritize that work based on the survey and conduct that throughout the year. This year, road services staff did complete approximately 400 repairs on our sidewalk. In addition to this, we are working very closely with our partners in infrastructure, water services. And maybe I'll turn it over to Karina just to talk a little bit about the work that they've been doing and what we've been partnering on there to do more sidewalk repairs.
Thank you, Quentin. Thank you, Chair, for the question. In 2023, we got $3 million for replacement of panels citywide. We replaced 1,200 of panels, and we are continuing working with Public Works on putting contracts together and doing this localized repairs, so we don't have those asphalt repairs, and we have the panels as you described.
Okay, so if there's a section that we're hearing about consistently and that we know is really bad, can we work with you to prioritize those pieces? Like, does the office have an influence?
So we get the information from your offices, which is great, plus the surveys and the inspections we do. And with that, we collect all the list and we work with Public Works to identify the most critical ones. And we are trying to bring that backlog down as fast as possible.
Okay, that's fine. Yeah, it's the number one issue I hear about from seniors, from people with mobility devices in the neighborhood. And we're shortly going to meet with some folks who use wheelchairs in our neighborhood to point out critical sections of sidewalk that represent a real danger. So if we're able to help provide that guidance, that would be really helpful. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Councillor. And just to add some commentary, because I agree with you, just so you know, there's a good lesson to be learned, and maybe we can work with councillors too on hot patch versus cold patch on asphalt seasons. And concrete seasons are really restricted, obviously, when we can actually pour concrete and throw in a natural disaster environment, which throws off our season. But they've done a tremendous job on shaving, making the lips meet accessibility standards. And that's something that's changed I've seen over the last 4 or 5 years, which has been a great improvement. So thank you. And let's fingers crossed, hope we don't have a 1 in 100 year storm again this year. And we can get back to regular business. And when it comes to the snow removal budget, I've sat around this table way too long. That's going to get clipped and people are tweeting it already. Anyway, that being said, we used to always be in deficit. It's based on calendar year, January to December. It's always a tricky wicket. We saw, like we mentioned with the storms and everything, how things go, but we always used to be in deficit. But we have increased from 85.8 million to $92.5 million this year, because it is a core service. We want to keep those sidewalks and everything clear. So a little extra commentary just to inform committee. I want to go to our next committee member, Councillor Bradley, if it's okay. Councillor Brockington has a meeting to jump to. If it's okay with you, can he just quickly ask a quick question? And is that fine with you?
Yeah, absolutely.
Councillor, I appreciate that. Councillor Brockington.
Thanks so much. I do have a few, but I promise they'll be brief. For staff, my understanding with road renewal, we have 3 separate budgets: road renewal, road patches, and road potholes. Is that correct?
There is a split, as the councillor indicated, between capital renewal, that is decision-making in asset management, and potholes in public works.
So for those 3 buckets, what's happening in 2024 for each bucket? Are they all getting above inflationary increases?
Through the chair, yes. So if you recall one of the earlier slides there, so the minor sidewalk capital program is doubling, going from the 1 to 2. But then Quentin also made reference to on the sidewalk maintenance that budget is increasing as well. I don't have the exact percentage, but it is going up with applicable inflation. The pothole program as well is increasing for 2024, as is the winter operations, as the chair just mentioned.
Okay, I will email staff later today. I just want a breakdown of the road and sidewalk renewal budget lines. I just want to make sure or verify the numbers, the specific numbers. The speed enforcement technology, good to see that investment. Are all the cameras that we approved in the 2023 budget installed?
Through you, Chair, 23 of the cameras are installed. 27, the remaining 13 will be installed later this year. Expecting in the next month. The construction started about a month ago with those locations, and by the end of the year, they should be all installed.
I'm just wondering, we approved these in March. It's now 8 months later. What's been the holdup?
So we work with infrastructure services. They go out and do the design and the tender and then the construction. So that was the ones that are getting done today. And then we did do a few earlier this year, and that was done in-house because it was a pretty simple design and installation.
Okay, for the new locations identified for 2024, is there flexibility on which locations we will agree upon?
The locations are selected based on the data, and that's tied to high-speed locations at schools and near parks. We also look at how many kids are walking to school. So the list that we've identified are the ones that are at the top of the list. So in terms of adding or removing locations, not something we would recommend, because then you're not getting to the locations where we're having the highest issues.
Okay, I'll follow up with staff. My last question, Chair, is if staff could just talk about the Airport Parkway widening project. A year ago, council endorsed a motion that said we would fast track the off-ramp, the Walkley Road off-ramp, and associated works. We would delay widening until after the LRT Trillium line opens for up to 2 years. What's in the short-term budget for the widening project?
Councillor, the balance of the budget for the Airport Parkway widening has been deferred as per council's direction. So it's not showing up until, I think the motion speaks to 2 years delay, or after the Trillium line is in place and after the TMP is complete. So in the forecast, it could be showing up after 2026, but then that's a future budget. So council will have an opportunity to make a decision at that time about that project.
So we wouldn't see construction of the widening happen before 2026. And it sounds like from your answer, it would likely start after 2026. Is that an accurate statement?
Based on, yes, we're just following council's direction.
Fair enough. Okay. So Chair, thank you so much for squeezing me in. I will have some questions. I'll follow up with staff, which I'll take offline. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Councillor, and thank you, Councillor Bradley. You're up next.
Thanks so much, Chair, and thanks staff for the presentation. I had a question around the fleet services review. So I had flagged that when I was reviewing the budget for that $6.3 million predicted savings in this budget cycle. So I appreciated in the slide the information on how that was going to be achieved. And I just wanted to clarify, so are you expecting that you're going to be able to dispose of all 100 vehicles in this budget year?
Through the chair, we are currently identifying up to 100 units, we're saying, because it's vehicles, equipment, and attachments. The disposal process is not the difficult process. It's right now what we're going through is identifying the units through looking at the motor pool, looking at low usage, and our rentals and leases. So yes, we once we do have those returned, any of the units that are in good condition, we'll actually relook at redeploying those units and taking units out of the fleet inventory that are in not so great condition and disposing of those.
And that's on your work plan then for this year? Like you expect to fully be able to identify all the vehicles and realize that complete savings this year?
Yes, we do.
Okay, and then can you clarify out of that 6.3, what of that is just one-time revenue due to disposal and what would be ongoing savings each year?
So I'll take that just for clarification. So that full 6.2, 6.3 million, 6.27 million is permanent base funding reduction. So we're going to reduce that from the base budget. The fleet operating budget funds the fleet capital program. So we're basically reducing that operating budget as a permanent reduction.
Okay. Thank you for that. My next question, it's very obscure, but it came up during our ward budget consultation that we had this week, and it was around, it's related to traffic services, and it was a line item that was identified as a variance last year. So it was damage to street poles from accidents. And we were in a deficit position of $800,000 on that line item. And at our budget meeting, Cyril, I think you had taken this question, and it was said that we try our best to recoup costs related to damage from insurance companies, but we're not always successful. And I guess I'm wondering, are we not successful because the claim fails, or are we not successful because we don't have the opportunity to pursue those claims, falls through the cracks, is not a priority? Because I know we've added another $200,000 in this budget to that line item. So maybe legal might be best to comment on this, how we process those claims, what our success rate is, and why there's that delta of $800,000 this year.
So through the chair, I'll go first, and maybe Phil can top me up if I misstate or add to it. But some of this is a little bit of a cycle, right? So we have our fiscal years, the calendar year. sometimes the accident might occur in October, but we may not be successful to recovering that cost from the insurance company till next year. So we do have some of those ebbs and flows, if you will, in year versus when we actually get it. We make every attempt to recover that, but there's always a challenge because in some cases, if there is no formal police report or insurance documentation that we can follow up with, we're kind of left in a black hole, if you will. So there's always going to be a risk where it's not 100% recovered, but we try our best to do it. Again, circumstantial, based on police reports, the incident, the severity, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So it's something that we monitor.
Okay, so the $800,000 deficit, there's nothing to be said that we weren't able to get to those claims or process them in time, or it expired or whatever it is. We process as many as we can, and sometimes there's a delta in which year we collect revenue. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Exactly. Yeah. Some of that is timing. Some of it, like the exact amount that we don't recover, I would say we'd have to go back and do some homework and see what that looks like. But there's a timing issue for the most part.
And then I just wanted to follow up on Councillor Brockington's questions with respect to the Airport Parkway. As he had indicated, the direction that Council had provided was that we would continue on with the off-ramp and the ancillary active transportation works around that project, and that we would defer the actual widening. I thought I saw in the budget that there was 6.9 million forecasted in 2026 for this project. And so I guess my question was, is that works around the off-ramp and the active transportation on either side of or on the one side of the parkway, or is that not it?
Councillor, the funding to do the work for the off-ramp and the other works on Walkley are part of the budget that you approved last year for the Airport Parkway. Again, this is one of those road projects that requires multi-year funding. So last year was the first installment, and that has been carved off purely for everything else except for the parkway widening. I know that the work is underway. It's in with infrastructure services, and there you have been working on the design, looking at the implications to traffic to the community with the ramp constructed without the parkway widening. And they've been having discussions with the ward councillor as well on that issue.
Awesome. Thank you so much. That's all my questions, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Committee Member Lowe.
Thank you, Chair. My first question kind of builds on the sidewalk questions that were raised by one of my colleagues earlier. And I know this year we had started a sidewalk inspection pilot in my ward, and I want to say one, maybe two other wards as well. When are we going to get I guess full results, and if we're going to proceed with it as part of a permanent part of our repair program? And how has there been any early positive effects that have come from it in terms of like crews being able to just stay on repairs instead of being diverted to do inspections?
Through the chair, thank you for your question, Councillor. So certainly you've heard in the discussion today, we continue to prioritize sidewalk maintenance and make investments in that area. In addition to that, my team also does a lot of research and kind of looks into new technologies, equipment, and best practices. And this year, you're right, we did do a sidewalk pilot to survey sidewalks this summer season, and that we hired a contractor that used a marked golf cart. They did have a GPS tablet so they could record the exact location, take notes on the type of deficiency, in addition to photos. That work really assists our crews and frees them up to actually complete repairs, because we do have quite a vast sidewalk network with over 2,500 kilometers of sidewalks. So it really allowed my staff to focus more on repairs while a portion of the surveying was being done. So currently right now, we are assessing the results of the data collected through the pilot we ran this year. And most certainly once we have those results, we'll be able to provide council with an update with regards to the results and next steps on possible expansion of the pilot.
In terms of let's say a very, very rough timeline, early next year, before the spring or in the spring?
Yeah, Councillor, certainly looking at providing that update prior to next summer season and next spring when we start that work again.
Excellent. Cool. Thank you.
Thank you, Committee Member Lowe. We'll swing down to Committee Member, I always have to check, Lulov.
Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Chair. I thought that Councillor King was next, but here I go. Thanks for indulging me, Mr. Chair. I'm really glad to see the major infrastructure projects being completed through this draft budget. However, in order to be able to support it at council, we need to see more investment in the East End. Our festival plaza at Centrum is crumbling. Seniors are tripping and falling over broken curbs and patched sidewalks. Cumberland Village is desperate for resurfacing, as the base is now eroding on several streets in Cambrian Heights and Cumberland Estates. And Cameron, the interprovincial connector, is in a sorry state. Queenswood Heights has Tompkins pushed off for another year. Queenswood Ridge needs pathway renewal desperately. Apollo Crater Pathway was funded in the last budget, but has yet to be completed, despite the fact that it will be an important connector now for pedestrians when route changes come in at OC Transpo. But the current state will not even allow for winter clearing. Mathieu Way requires geotechnical study because it has been left in such a sorry state. Chatelaine Village is one of our oldest neighborhoods, and both pathways and roads are crumbling. Not one priority that my community and I identified to staff has been included in the list that's before us today. There's no funding to advance Brian Coburn, something that we've been saying is desperately needed for well over a decade, and something that the NCC has been blocking every step of the way. There's no further funding for a pedestrian bridge at Trim. Hundreds of people have to cross a 4-lane highway on foot at grade today. And just imagine when the LRT starts running and demand for that station increases. I really hope that we can continue to work together between now and the final budget vote, because I see many projects in the south and the west. But here we are again, another budget and another example of how the East seems to be left out. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Luloff. Committee Member Devine.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, staff, not only for your presentation, but for working so closely with my office and my colleagues over the past little while. I'm very happy with a lot of things that I see. I have a wide ranging array of questions. Bear with me. So my first question, I think, is I think this would be a question for you, Cyril. It pertains to the line item on page 3. So I'm referencing the hard copy, page 3 at a 165. The line item for overtime and salaries for salaries. And I'm going to assume that those salaries and overtime pertain to all road services, including snow removal. And what I noted here, for overtime, we budgeted the same amount for 2024 as we budgeted for 2023, which was just over 6.65 million. But our overtime forecast for 2023 was 8.65 million. And our overtime actuals for 2023 was just over 9 million. Now, I see that we've budgeted about 2.5 million more in salaries for 2024 versus 2023. So I do see that there's some increased capacity there, but because we're budgeting for the same amount of overtime, I just want to know, by keeping the overtime budget at the same, is there a risk that we're under budgeting for anticipated overtime?
Through the chair. So again, it's one of those things where we look at the bottom line as well, right? So from a salary perspective, we know core increases per the collective agreements. Overtime is very, very fluid and variable, mainly winter operations, mainly because of when the snow falls, is it during a regular shift versus an overnight shift versus does it bleed into 3, 4, 5 days where you get the overtime? So we try and restrain and control overtime throughout the year, factoring in those variabilities. If we were to increase at the end of the day, how we allocate that $92.5 million on those very variable units is less important versus the very direct units of the true core salary, true equipment costs. So I'm not too concerned if I increased overtime by a couple $100,000, I would just basically decrease my contract to keep my bottom line the same. So I focus more on the bottom line as opposed to those little nuances in the more variable elements, if you will.
And the bottom line right now has an increase of about 2.5 million.
The bottom line for winter operations, which is the main driver of what you're seeing there, is going up by is about 6.5 million.
Perfect. I mean, there's more capacity. I appreciate that. All right, I'm going to turn to a question on ASE, automated speed enforcement cameras, for for those watching from home, and the anticipated growth from that. So first of all, I am very, very grateful to staff for the 2 new ASC placements in my ward. I know a lot of parents and families are going to be breathing a sigh of relief over that. So what I see in the budget is we're looking to increase spending on ASC placements from about 2.4 million in 2024 to 2.778 million in 2027. I assume, not that it's a cash grab, but I assume that we're also anticipating greater revenues from those larger ASC placements. And so what I'm looking to find out is there, if we are anticipating more revenues from that growth, some high-level understanding from staff of where those increased revenues would be directed towards. Because I understand that one targeted direction of ASC revenues is neighborhood traffic calming projects. I think nobody's nodding their head, so it sounds like I'm possibly right. But what I also see in the budget is that for the line items for neighborhood traffic calming projects, we decrease our budget line item from 2024 to 2025, and then we stagnate for 3 years. There's no growth in the neighborhood traffic calming budgets. And so if the anticipated revenue from ASC goes towards projects like neighborhood traffic calming, is there a reason why there's stagnation in the neighborhood traffic calming budget from 2025 on?
So I'll kind of walk you through a little bit of the technical mechanics, if you will. So basically the automated speed enforcement program, as per the policy approved by council, is the revenue comes in and then it supports the operating cost of the program. So we do have the bylaw, Service Ottawa, and traffic services. So the cost of that program is spread in 3 different budgets. Then the net residual revenue that's left over, that goes over into the road safety action reserve. And then from there, we take that money out of that reserve and then we funnel that through the various capital projects. I don't have the exact page, but there is a road safety action capital project in the traffic services component of the budget book, where I think it's, don't quote me, but I think it creeps up to close to $60 million in 2025, 2026, 27. So Phil can speak a little bit in terms of what that program entails if you want more information. But there's also 2 different components of traffic calming. There's the ward by ward perspective, where in this budget, we're increasing the councillor ward budget to 75K. And that plan is basically to grow that to 100K by the end of the term. So we increased to 12.5, 23, 12.5 this year, blah, blah, blah for the next 2 years. But then there's also another traffic network program over in Vivi's shop, which she can speak to.
So the neighborhood traffic calming program is for the permanent traffic calming measures. And I wouldn't pay too much attention whether the amount dips a little bit and then comes up again, because those are forecasts. And they're really, we look at the program, what are the projects that we have that have been studied and then now have to go into implementation. And that's how we look at the budget from year to year. So it's an indication, it's pretty well steady. And actually we had a huge jump a few years ago from a program that got very little funding to over 2 million now. And that helped with some of the backlog. So it's a good program. There's lots of demand still for traffic calming in established areas, not the newer communities, because we have designs built in with the new communities now to combat future speeding in neighborhoods. Okay.
And yes, and Councillor Johnson and I will likely agree that it's those permanent traffic calming projects, either through redesign or other permanent measures in our established wards, where we're hankering for some more there. And in anticipation of the further revenue growth when we get our processing system in place, I think I'll just be hoping to see or looking to see that in 25, 27, 29, that there's more of those permanent fixtures. And Chair, I do have more questions, but cut me off when you got to, and I can always come back on the list. So a little question, this is very, very ward specific. On the road resurfacing list of projects, page 65, first of all, thank you for everything you're doing on Divine Road, even though it's not in my ward, but every dollar there spent is a dollar well spent as far as I'm concerned. So I did note, no self-interest there. I did note, so Vivi, as we just spoke about a few minutes ago, so there's planned road resurfacing on Merivale from Viewmount to Meadowlands. Hopefully, planning department is going to pass a list of secondary plans for this year, including a new secondary plan for Maryvale. And that secondary plan is going to cover from baseline 2 all the way down to Viewmount. And in that secondary plan, I imagine there may be the prospect of road and intersection redesign. Based on my conversations with Hydro Ottawa, even as recently as yesterday, they are looking at long-term plans for burying hydro lines along Maryvale. Based on our infrastructure plan, there's a plan for doing new sewer lines on Maryvale, I believe from baseline to Meadowlands. And so just my question is, may I assume that all departments and outside stakeholders, when we're talking about all of these major infrastructure projects on Maryvale, there's a cohesive design to it. I assume everybody's talking to everybody. But I suppose my real question is, if there's road resurfacing planned on baseline, on Maryvale, from Viewmount to Meadowlands, and I don't know the timeline for the actual road resurfacing, but if we do that road resurfacing prior to all of these integrated infrastructure projects happening, do we risk limiting what we can do?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the question. You're right, Maryvale from Viewmount to Meadowlands is in the budget book on page 65.
Yep.
On page 64, there's a heading that says road resurfacing below the line. It isn't planned and budgeted for 2024. It's still a good question.
Oh, that line item is below the line?
Yes.
Oh, sorry.
And I gotta put back on.
Yeah, thanks. I'll get back on.
It's still a great question.
All my big dreams and plans.
It made it to the book.
Hey.
There's a lot of coordination internally because, as you know, we exercise a lot of due diligence on the money that we spend. And so we work hard to coordinate and make sure that we're not going to dig up something fresh. So please take our assurance that yes, there's a lot of internal work to make sure that those plans are coordinated.
Great. Thank you for that. And feel free to go back on the board later on. At least Divine Road is being taken care of. I know Councillor Kitts is very happy about that too. Committee member Dudas.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'm kind of, this budget is a difficult one, right? Because it is one of those ones where you appreciate the small things and the little things. Like I was incredibly happy to see that there's a cable fault repair for Gaultois. Like that is tiny in the scheme of things, but it's going to be really important in terms of solidifying the infrastructure. But I almost I need to echo my colleague, Councillor Luloff's comments in that we are representing a very vast city. It's rural, it's urban, it's suburban, it's, you know, it's varied, but it is aged. There are sections that are incredibly aged. And I'm not just talking about the roads or the MUPs. I'm talking about the underground infrastructure. And we heard about the, you know, the storm sewers and things. These things need to be repaired. And in the last term of council, we consistently spoke about the infrastructure gap, the difference between what the city spends and what it needs to spend annually to maintain infrastructure, you know, and keep it in good repair, kind of like a proactive, make sure that the, you know, the roof isn't leaking situation. And we actually made investments into that to close that gap. I'm not hearing about that anymore. And it gravely concerns me because as I look around my community, things are starting to fall apart. We're patching it up. We don't have big plans to actually do the proactive repairs in my view and in my residents' view. So I'm asking staff, where is the gap now? And I know that this is a long-range financial plan question. And if you can't answer it, I'll take it offline. But where are we at with closing that gap? And how does this particular budget take that gap into account and continuing to proactively invest in closing it?
Through the chair. So, Councillor, in the transmittal report and some of the other budget documentation, we reflect the chart graph that we've been showing for the last several years. And we are still on track to close that gap by 2026. So we did come forward in 2017, 2018 timeframe with the tax support long-range financial plan, where we identified at that time there was an annual funding of 125 million. And in that those years' dollars, the requirement was 195 million. So every year since then, we've increased by inflation above that. Plus, we've increased the growth funding to that by about $6 to $7 million per year. And we're still very much on track to close that for 2026. In this budget, we do have another one-time $30 million bump up as we did in 2023. So if you refer to that chart, and if you need be, just give me a shout after offline, but we've actually also increased our one-time investments through that 30 million last year, 30 million this year as well, and still very much on track to close it by 2026. Now, we do know that we will be coming back, working closely with Tammy's team in 2025 with the revised new asset management plans as per provincial legislation, where we're going to refresh that LRFP, if you will, with the revised numbers based on the new criteria set for us by the province.
Okay. I really appreciate that, because I think if we're not investing in closing the gap and at least bringing it to the point where we're working from a solid base, we're just struggling to catch up. So that is incredibly helpful. I like to hear that. What I'm wondering too is, in the past, we've been able to maximize our own city dollars by tapping into federal or provincial funding. They've been through various infrastructure, ISIP, and different things like that. Are we aware of any potential funding envelopes that might be coming through the feds or the province in the near horizon that we could maybe use to leverage in any way?
Through the chair, I'm personally not aware today. I mean, these things are always very variable and fluid, but everybody in the city, every department I can honestly speak to, we're always got our eyes open, right? So if something pops and we see it, we're definitely going to be the first ones on board to, add the application in for any potential funding we can receive.
And on the flip side of that, you mentioned, and I was listening to the presentation, you spoke about sidewalks and, the fact that there's that particular budget towards development funded sidewalks, and we're seeing a deficit in that. Not a deficit, forgive me, in terms of finance, we're seeing less into that because of the changes with the province. Do we anticipate that with the changes of the province and all the planning legislation that has been altered over the last little while, that we're going to start seeing less money towards our sidewalks or our road repairs that would have stemmed from a development or in densification?
From our through the chair, from our normal renewal life cycle, no, because DCs obviously, as you know, go to growth. On the growth side, we are coming back in April timeframe with the 2024 update. What we've publicly heard from the province is that they are committed to making municipalities whole when it comes to all these Bill 23, 109, yada, 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 different bill impacts. So what I can say is, I'm really working closely with our DC partners in that DC background study to be really the catalyst. Okay, what does that actually look like, and will they come forward with those commitments? From a 2024 budget perspective, we're still continually as doing what we do as what we know with the existing background study, and hoping that the province will maintain their commitment to keeping municipalities whole for any of the final residual impacts of all these different bills.
Okay, I hope to goodness they're not just talking and they actually act, because we could use these dollars, and I'd really like to see us start, moving ahead on these infrastructure things. Because I'll just finish by saying, Chair, if you'll indulge me for one moment, I've got communities and I've got roads in Chapel Hill North that never got the final lift of asphalt, and they're older than I am, and I'm not going to say how old I am. I have Convent Glen and multi-use pathways that literally disintegrate when you step on them, and we've been and staff are incredible. Like, I think we can all agree around this table, staff are incredible. They do what they can with what little they have in terms of funding or the resources. So absolutely kudos to them. But, when we look around our aging communities, it's so difficult to keep up, let alone add new. So I think that this is a struggle for me with this particular budget. I look forward to continuing to work with staff in the mayor's office to see if we can, leverage any opportunities, particularly in the East End, because obviously that's the community I represent. But I think that this is always a constant struggle, and we need to find more money for this infrastructure pieces. It's just sound investment. Anyway, thank you very much, Chair. I appreciate your time.
Great. Thank you very much, Councillor Duda. We're really selling the East End today. Everything's disintegrating and we're falling into holes everywhere. But that being said, I want to thank staff. I know we're this term of council, we're really committed, as we've heard, to closing that gap by 2026. And I think that's something we haven't seen in many, many terms. I think that's very important. Vice Chair Kitts.
Team me up nicely. Thank you, Chair. I was deep in the 2013 TMP last night. Wild night at my house. How many identified projects in the affordable network from the 2013 TMP are we still working through?
Councillor, the 2013 TMP has the projects in the affordable network dropped into 3 different phases to be completed by 2031. Shortly after, a few years after, we found out that revenue wasn't coming in at the level that was anticipated when the development of the TMP was done, the modeling back in 2011. So we're still working on just the last few projects in phase 1. Phase 2 projects, I believe, have been studied and just waiting for funding. And then phase 3 are really not within this time period. However, as you know, we have the TMP update. So by 2024, early part of 2025, 2024, we'll have a draft network, draft priority to go out to consult with the public, and then council will then debate that in the early part of 2025. So to answer your question, we're behind in the implementation based on the revenue. We're trying to go as fast as we can, but it's really a matter of getting the funding through development charges, and the projects themselves have also started to creep up in costs because of inflation, market conditions, and so on.
Okay, thank you. And so for the projects that are left in phase 1 and then for phase 2, are they in a certain prioritization?
For phase 1, the ones that we've committed funding to, such as Green Bank, and we've got dollars spent on design for that, that would probably stay as a priority. For everything else, we will examine in the context of the new TMP, its policies, and reviewing where growth is happening, where the pressures are, which areas that are lacking access. That would be critical to address that issue versus congestion. So access is important. And I believe you've reviewed also the criteria for our evaluation as part of the TMP part 1.
Okay, so Green Bank was kind of pulled out, and then beyond that, any other major projects, we don't have a prioritization list. That prioritization will come through in the update.
Yes, it's time to review.
Okay. So looking at the 2013 TMP, building Brian Coburn, the section from Mablu to Navin is a line item in phase 1, which obviously was completed. That exists. But there's in brackets, it says ultimate 4-lane road. But the widening doesn't appear as a standalone item. So does that mean that the widening was not included?
Not as part of phase 1. So it will be again reviewed as part of our update.
Okay. And so is the fact that it wasn't a standalone item making it challenging for us to dedicate investment into that project? Because it was not included in the 2013 TMP.
Not in the 2013, but as part of the new update, we will look at everything afresh. And we do recognize that there's been a lot of growth in Orleans, and there is a missing link, the Brian Coburn connection, to bring the east into other connections to the rest of the other parts of the city. So all of that will be done, and we will send this all out, and we'll consult with councillors, we will consult with the public. Because right now we're still working with just the 2013 network. But in a short while, there will be a different plan.
Okay, because that was going to be my next question, maybe perhaps better asked or directed to Dawn, is has South Orleans grown more quickly than we anticipated? So when we created the 2013 TMP, there was a recognition that Brian Coburn should be 4 lanes, but obviously that project was sort of carved out into 2 phases. But now in 2023, if looking back, do we think it has grown faster than we anticipated?
Thank you, Chair. Obviously, I don't have those, specific numbers at my fingertips. My impression is it probably has, but I could follow up with specific data.
Okay, thank you. The 2024 capital budget summary, investment in renewal is triple investment in growth citywide, but would you say that in high growth areas, the investment in growth is higher?
Well, we use the funds that we have to address the growth, and we do recognize that there is pressure. There's a lot of pressure across the city. So, we're following the plan that council had approved as part of the 2013, making adjustments where we can. For instance, Airport Parkway has been deferred for a couple of years. There was Strandherd got moved in before Green Bank. These were all council decisions. So we can, we look to council for any changes if they wish. But the budgets that you have before you are balanced with the envelopes that are for this year. So if we add something, we'll have to take something out. And I really recommend that we wait until the next TMP update is complete, because then there will be, we'll provide you with a rationale as to why the projects are occurring in a certain order that we will be proposing. And all of that will be out for public review as well.
Okay, so that 113 million for the Strandherd widening, and the 20 million for the Green Bank realignment, those 2 projects you would say are investment based on growth, both of those?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chair Kitts. Committee Member Johnson.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. So just a couple questions, and some of my colleagues will have sort of asked around the same issues, but I wanted to check in on the staffing for your team, Quentin, because we did see over the last year that what I'm trying to impress upon the residents of College Ward is that there really is just one team. And so every season that they want to be mad about something because you haven't got to it as quickly as people would expect, that you literally are doing that other season thing still, and you can't be in 2 places at once. And I think that is actually a really important message for people to understand, that there are literal individual bodies that are running from season to season to try and keep up with the constant changes. But obviously the climate change impacts on your team have been significant. So you were pulled away from street sweeping because you were supporting the Constance Bay flooding, for example, or the ice storm had a lot of breakage. And so we had a lot of debris cleanup, and all of that sort of ends up being within the Public Works team. And I want to know that you are budgeting and able to absorb those shocks, and to what extent do you contract out those pressures versus build it within your own staffing complement?
Through the chair, thank you for the question, Councillor. So most certainly after all the emergency events that we've experienced over these last few years, we do debrief on how we can do things better, and obviously how we can do things that don't impact our services moving forward. So most certainly looking at contracted services is an option as far as how we leverage and supplement in cases like that, which we continue to review and do after each event. In addition to that, I will say that as the city grows, you're right, my team needs to grow. And I know this year through the investments we've made, specifically in winter operations, there is a growth component there for additional resources, because we know our city's grown in terms of road network and sidewalk network and so on. So we're continuing to work with Cyril and his team to identify those needs as well.
Okay, that's super. So certainly, I'm glad to hear that you're getting the support that you need. And I might encourage all of my council colleagues to, support their residents to understand that part of the growth strategy is not that Quentin's team can divide themselves in half and put half a body here and half a body there. I think it is commendable that we have these folks that are running around trying to backfill, every climate emergency that we have. And similarly, when your power goes out as a resident, you can expect that you might need to take care of yourself for 72 hours. We might expect, if there are certain pressures when it comes to climate change elsewhere, that residents can take a breath and they might have their branches on their lawn for a little bit longer, or they might, have what other expected pressures, because we are all just really doing the best we can. So thank you very much for that. I might say something totally unpopular right now, but I don't mind. I'm generally liked. I would love to know so I'm noticing the TTC budget has increased, right? So you're giving each ward a bump in TTC again. And I wonder whether there might ever be an appetite to apply a geographic sensitivity to the amount that each ward gets for TTC. Politically, probably zero appetite. Certainly staff wouldn't suggest it, but I'm floating it here as an idea, simply because I do believe we have some data to support why the outer urban wards might need a little extra help. So when we look at this, we see within the road renewal, many of the larger integrated road projects are within the core, which means that when those are built up, you get to be built to 30K an hour and you get the investments that way. We also have the data that came through, I believe, the serious injury and collision report just this last year that showed that we are having a lot of accidents in the outer urban area. They're not necessarily the most fatal because the speeds are not what we see in the rural areas, and I appreciate that. But we do have quite a spike of accidents in the outer urban area, with very few facilities that our suburbs enjoy being built to new standards, with sidewalks, with streetlights, with shorter blocks, for example. With that, I think we really could consider applying a little bit of geographic sensitivity to the amount that we get in TTC. I don't know who's going to do this politically. I appreciate that no one wants to, but we must be able to conceive that we have other data to support some geographic sensitivity within our policy. So perhaps I'll follow up on that at another time, but I did want to put that out there. Outer urban wards are not going to see investment in the road renewal projects that we need to create that 30K an hour. The TTC is one of the few ways that we can get there. And speaking for Ward 8 especially, I am working through an enormous backlog of inattention to these issues over the last several years, and I need help. So I'm putting that out there for my residents. It's very important. I'm also really quite delighted that we are seeing one of the, from what I understand, one of the first sort of pilot projects for the NTC and TTC teams to be doing together. And we're going to be seeing that out in Bell's Corners. And I'm really excited for that because I think we're going to have some great data. So how those teams might work together. So I'd love to hear, because it was mentioned in the staff report, how the service review is asking those two departments how they might find efficiencies. I know that it was mentioned at a high level, but are there certain things that you're looking for, or certain opportunities that you can already see with those two groups working together?
Sorry, I think they've cut me off here with my microphone. So anyway, yeah, so that service review is just about to begin. So I think the first phase is just sort of what's happening in terms of an as is. And then it's trying to find if there's ways that we can do our work more efficiently, effectively. I mean, we do work together very closely. Oh. We do work very closely together in terms of trying to coordinate work, but I think there's to improve that. So that'll be something that our team, here we go. Our team will work with Vivi's team and trying to get those, and we can provide updates as we go through if that's of interest to you and other councillors.
Okay, that's great. Yes, I'd love to hear further how you uncover some information there. And my final question is just the new street lighting program. So I understand we don't currently have a new street lighting program. I don't know if it's under this budget, but you did mention a little bit about street lighting, Quentin. And so am I correct in understanding there's no new street lighting program? And how do we get one?
In terms of, there's no funding for new streetlights. That doesn't mean new streetlights won't go in. If, if the road safety action plan, we do safety reviews. And if one of the items or measures that's identified that says, yeah, we should put streetlights to try to reduce fatal and serious injuries, that can be looked at. But specifically to, because I know we get lots of requests from residents on their streets that like a streetlight. But if it's not tied to the road safety file, there is no program at this juncture.
Great. Thank you, Councillor. So we've gone through the first round, I believe. So non-committee members, Councillor Kavanaugh.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, got it. Thank you. And I just want to say I still like Lane. So it's yeah. In fact, I'm just going to talk about something we've been working on, and I'm hoping you have good news for us. This is time sensitive. The MTO is doing their bridge replacements, and it's going to affect both College and Bay Ward. This is right from Maitland out to Greenbank. This is an opportunity to have better active transportation connectivity going north-south. This is a big opportunity, and I just wanted to know if we're prioritizing that in our budget, since it has to be done when MTO is ready to replace those bridges.
Yes, Councillor, we are. We work very closely with the MTO. We've been pushing them on this to include active transportation on their bridge rehabs. So it's very good news when they said that they would do that as part of their projects. Maitland, as you know, is the one that we are funding, but the other 4 structures, they will include that with their projects.
Thank you. I thought I'd start off with a little good news. And in terms of the budget, it says 3.9 for new sidewalks, and it leaves me wondering if we're talking about new sidewalks in suburbia. Are we talking about new sidewalks in areas that didn't have sidewalks ever? And that's a big part of places like the older suburbs. I have that issue big time in Bay Ward, and with the stations coming in, we've got 7 new transit stations. And sometimes there's no sidewalks going to them. This is a big issue. We're talking about connectivity, and I know that the TMP talked about, or council approved 100 sidewalk projects, but we have to look at that connectivity. It's absolutely crucial if we're going to get people to go to those stations. There's many examples, but just walking through Wood Park, this is a neighborhood that's kind of an anomaly, where it still has ditches, and and it doesn't have sidewalks, and yet there's a train station, New Orchard, right at the bottom. Brand new buildings now that have been approved across the street. So it needs to catch up, because people will be walking to those stations. So I just wanted your comment on that.
Councillor, the 3.9 that we're requesting in 2024 are for standalone sidewalk projects, because sidewalks are also constructed through other programs like road widenings, road renewal, like the very in-depth integrated road renewal works. As for, and we also were involved with the light rail team on looking at connections to stations. Now, if for some communities where there are ditches, it's very expensive for us to build the sidewalk, because we have to then put in a curb. And when you put in a curb to support the sidewalk, then you have to change the ditch drainage to piped drainage. So it jumps in order of magnitude for costs, and this program, the pedestrian facilities program, would not be able to absorb that kind of project, which is best done when there's an integrated works. But I do understand, like, when will that happen for a community that has been built with ditches and that the road conditions are still good. So it's something we have to look at. Perhaps maybe some paved shoulders may help. It's not ideal. They would not be the same as a sidewalk, but we'll continue to look at what we can do because of the existing conditions.
Thank you. And that includes winter maintenance too. We have to make sure that the winter maintenance is done very thoroughly on these walkable routes. And recently, I was able to have a meeting with the NCC to talk about, Quentin was there, to talk about pathways that belong to them, but their connectivity for our stations. And I just wanted to get a commitment in terms of looking at this, because this is, as we get more development, such as in areas like Regina Street, where it's to where they depend on that pathway when we're building buildings with only 0.5% parking, therefore they're going to take transit. But the pathway is a NCC pathway, and we need to work together, and I just want to get that commitment.
Through the chair, thank you for that question, Councillor. Most certainly that commitment's there to continue to work closely with Phoebe's group and transportation planning, as well as the NCC with regards to those pathways.
Thank you. In terms of traffic calming, I think everyone prefers permanent traffic calming, and it's having those two categories. It's sort of like if you're the place that you want to put the traffic calming permanently, which I guess is mostly speed humps. I don't know if there's anything else you're considering as permanent. But it's not on the list for the city. That means it comes out of our temporary traffic calming budget. So, which is costly, but we want to do them because people speed all different times of the year. So the temporary stuff with the flex sticks is problematic in areas where people are, taking advantage of the fact that it's winter. And yes, there's snow on the side, but they're still speeding, and we want to keep that traffic calm. So I just want to know how we can work together on that, because it just feels like I appreciate the bump in the budget for bumps. But can we afford all of the areas that really need it?
Through you, Chair. Yeah, so that's something that we're going to look at through the service review that we're doing for the temporary traffic calming and the traffic calming. And so we will, take a look at that and see what we can do from that perspective. I mean, as the amounts get higher, and I mean, we've got thousands of flex sticks out in the street now. So at some point it's going to be saturated, and we'll be looking at more of those longer term permanent fixes, because ultimately that's what we want. I mean, the flex sticks are really there just to allow us to do something short term while we get to that point. Now there's thousands of kilometers of road, so it's, short term can be a long time too. But so we will look at that. I also noticed part of the road safety action plan, there is funding associated to do some permanent traffic calming near 3 schools. And those are normally on local, like residential streets, to get those speeds down, because ultimately that's where we want to be, is to permanently have traffic drive at the speeds we want them to in those communities. And really the permanent measures are the best way of doing it versus all the other things that we do.
Thank you. One thing I appreciated in the budget was talking about when you do road surface renewals, that you're looking at cycle infrastructure, so that every time something is redone, that you're taking into account cycle infrastructure. I did notice it was done on Carling, like the far west end of Carling, going out to Canada, and it's very helpful. So I felt like every time I got a road repaving notice, that I had to say, please, what can we do for cycling? I don't feel I should have to do that. I feel like it should be automatic, that when we're redoing a road, that we're taking a look at it and seeing how we can make it safer for cyclists as well. Can you comment on that, please?
Yes, my team works very closely with Sue's team and looking at the resurfacing, we actually scope it. And it's always the first thing we do is how can we fit in cycling here? But the resurfacing program is limited. And so the best that we can do at times be to put in a painted bike lane, but to start moving curbs in order to put in a cycle track, then that really overshoots the budget for the resurfacing project itself. So we do look at this, we see what's possible within the confines of the budget. And if Sue has anything more to add to that, okay, no.
And I hope we're looking at the stats of the area in terms of safety, because some areas, it's clear that cyclists need to be protected because it's a busy road. And so that's an important part as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Kavanaugh. Councillor King.
Thank you, Chair. And I'd just really like to thank staff for the in-depth budget that they put before us, as well as the ongoing work that they do throughout the year. Whether it's filling potholes to removing snow, it's very important for our residents that we have the appropriate funding for all of these operations. I had a few questions. They did surround the temporary traffic calming measures budget, which we're thankful is being increased, and which I think we can seek efficiencies from in terms of their application. I'm looking forward to having continuing conversations with the mayor's office around his promise and his election manifesto around 30K, so that we don't have to continually come to this committee with councillors' reports and allocate dollars from the temporary traffic calming measures budgets of the wards to bring down those speeds to 30K. But I do know that this is a very important program. I know that other councillors are pleased that we're seeing dollars being allocated and that the budget is going up. But I'm wondering, and I'd like to ask staff whether we have enough traffic technologists and traffic service coordinators specifically to review traffic calming requests and to conduct speed surveys and traffic assessments.
Through you, Chair, yes, we review this on an annual basis in terms of the amount of staff we have to manage this program. And that review that was completed earlier this year indicates that the comment we have today, it meets the standard levels that we've agreed with council. So there's no request. That being said, if there was a need, we would ask. We've done that in the past with the temporary traffic calming program. It started probably about 8-9 years ago with I think 2 people, and now I think we're up to about 10 or 11. So as the program continues to grow, I'd also note though that as the program grows, we're starting, like I mentioned earlier, to see a shift to more permanent measures, and that takes a little less resources in terms of the flex takes that take a lot in terms of reviews and that. So those things tend to balance themselves out. But like I said, if we needed more staff, we would make that ask.
Appreciate that answer. And I was also wondering whether we have enough vehicles and resources for road painting, including both the white and yellow lines and the painted TTC messaging. We know that there have been some delays carried over from last year impacting this year's painting schedule. So I'm just wondering if we have enough resources there.
Through you, Chair, yes, indeed, with the painting crews we do. We actually, I think it was last year's budget or the year before, we actually requested an extra crew just to deal with TTC. One thing we are doing is we're using the more permanent paint on some of the TTC measures. So the hope is that instead of having to go repaint it every year, we can do it every 2nd or 3rd year, because a lot of these locations are on more collector and local roads where the traffic volumes aren't as high, and the higher quality paint should help with that. We did get a second paint truck last year as well. It became operation. So which also is using the MMA paint, which is a more longer lasting paint. So again, we're hoping that through the installation of those things, we gives us a bit more capacity to do those things. But as I noted earlier, if we get to a point where we need more resources, we'll be sure to make that request.
I appreciate that answer. I think, you preemptively answered my next questions, which would have been around how often is the paint applied, and what do we do when it becomes worn away? Because there's been increasing numbers of those applications that have been worn in my ward. So we just wanted to make sure that those tools are being applied. I also had questions around damage to street light infrastructure related to MVAs. I think I'd probably rather have that referred to as motor vehicle incidents rather than motor vehicle accidents. But is damage to street light infrastructure related to MVAs climbing year over year?
I think it's sort of between 200 or 300 vehicle collisions a year. The challenge with the street lights, because we also have the similar with traffic signals. Usually, though, when a traffic signal light gets hit, the whole signal shuts down. The cops show up and they know who did who was there, and they can get information in terms of the collision. The challenge we find with street lights is we see a lot of hit and runs. So basically, when a street light gets hit, it's not like it just gets hit, and a lot of times people just leave. So we don't actually get a police report. And that's the challenge, is if we don't have a police report, we can't go back and make the claim against the insurance. So we have a program in set. We last year, actually, in the budget, we approved an FTE to work specifically on getting that money back. So the hope is as more and more claims come in, we get more and more information in terms of from the police. But it still remains a challenge, and that's why I think, especially with the streetlights, we'll never be able to recover everything because, like I said, we have a lot of hit and runs where we just don't know that information. But it's something that we're working on, and we're always trying to maximize our revenues in terms of repairing our infrastructure.
I appreciate that. I was just also wondering if we have locations where there are repeat MVAs, so repeat damage to street light infrastructure, whether we have the capacity to actually adjust the locations of those street lights.
Yeah, that would be something that we would look at. I'm not aware of street lights, the same street light getting hit multiple times. But if that was occurring, that would be something that we would look at, because at the end of the day, if that's occurring, then there may be other issues, and that could be looked at through our road safety program.
I appreciate that. And my last set of quick questions revolve around automated speed enforcement. I'm just wondering, with the new projected installations of cameras, whether we have projected estimations of revenue.
Yes, we do. So by the end of 2024, when we have the additional 20 cameras, which would bring us up to 60 cameras in total, I think the gross revenue is about just over $60 million. Now that's gross. Then when you go through the net, which then because we have to reduce the operating costs of the processing center, getting information from MTO, Service Ottawa that have to sort of work at the back end, and also the program costs that are associated with the program, it leaves about $20 million for the Road Safety Action Plan fund. And so the plan is to use that money in the approved plan that was brought to committee this morning. But we see over the next few years that number will increase as we get more cameras, and all that net revenue will be reinvested into road safety, because our goal is to get down to zero as soon as possible in terms of fatals and serious injuries.
And one last question, I'm just wondering, and it's a kind of a technical one or a regulatory one. We know that community safety zones are designated around secondary schools. I was just curious whether community safety zone designations under the legislation can be applied to properties owned by institutions such as colleges and universities.
Yeah, community safety zones can be put on any city roadway. We, through the automated speed enforcement program, we have delegated authority to install them whenever we put a camera. So if there was for example, actually, there's going to be a camera going on later this fall on Bronson by Brewer Park, which is near Carleton. So that'll be a community safety zone. That being said, there are we don't recommend installing community safety zones outside of where the speed cameras are because we have found that they're not effective unless you have continual enforcement and the police can't be there all the time. And so that's why they're really focused on where the automated speed enforcement, because we have seen a large decrease in speeds where those cameras are placed.
Well, I appreciate those answers. I know that's a very important program, especially with cameras being located near to school zones. I am aware of the cameras that are coming soon on Bronson. We often remind residents that we warn that these zones are coming so that they can start to adjust their behavior, which is very important because we don't want residents or other people speeding through school zones. And I know we'll be in my ward examining the potential of automated speed enforcement on Donald, where there are two schools that are located very close to one another. So I think it's a very important tool. I'd like to just thank staff for the comprehensive work that they've undertaken in the budget and thank them for the answers to my questions. Thank you, Chair.
Great. Thank you, Councillor. And it's great working with you as well, specifically on one of the schools in your neighborhood and working with staff. I want to remind how committed our staff are. They're going to do a site visit with us in the future. And that just shows the level of commitment to safety within our community zones and our school zones. Councillor Hill.
Oh, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. It's a pleasure to join you at Transportation Committee this morning. I want to, start out really in a similar way to many of my colleagues here by just giving my appreciation to the staff for the outstanding work that I think has been put into this budget report. There's certainly a lot that goes into it. When I think of the amount of questions that I've certainly put back to staff, and then I multiply that by 24, I can only imagine the amount of work that you guys have been putting into this. A lot of the things that were recently talked about by my colleagues let me know that I think my concerns are quite aligned. And I've had the occasion over the last several months to meet with the families of several people who have been hit on Greenbank Road, on River Run Road, and we had a child that was hit up on Cedarview as well. And so this is certainly becoming a very real issue to me, and I don't take the traffic safety investments lightly that we're making, and I genuinely can't tell you how appreciative I am of the time that staff have taken to listen to me and to my concerns about those issues in those areas. One of those areas is on Greenbank Road, and it is essentially the old bridge that's now looking to be realigned and the acceleration of that program as a result of this budget. And I just want to highlight this project is a strange beast because really it was funded back in 2016 and ready to go. But that the resources were moved into alternate programming as a result of the tragedy that took place on the Via Rail line at Woodruff Road. Whereby we made the decision actively to invest those resources in grade separation. So for the community down in Half Moon Bay, really the problem they've had is one of expectation management, because they've been told since really 2007 that they could expect that this investment in their transportation systems would be made, well, now it's about 12 years ago. And it continues to get kicked down the can. And so I appreciate very much that we're taking active steps now to look to move forward. And it's very exciting because as we have now taken the opportunity to invest in the installation of some commercial real estate down in Half Moon Bay, that's going to really open up the opportunity for a community that until now has really been a residential desert with no access to retail. And because of the transportation systems, they've really been slaves to the car. The first phase of opening up Greenbank's realignment is going to allow a genuine transformation in the transportation system of Half Moon Bay into a multimodal option space where folks can get on that bus rapid transit. They can bike, they can walk, because for anybody that has tried to bike across that little death trap of a 290-degree turn fishing bridge that goes across the Jock River there, it's something else. And you know, the danger there, you know, that I'm highlighting, it's exacerbated when you see that, you know, there's a high school that's located about 300 meters north of that little bridge, and the catchment area includes Half Moon Bay. And so peak times, you've got hundreds of kids walking up and down that road. And that is a place where I've had 2 people that were hit. So I really want to highlight that the advancement of this program is going to really transform Half Moon Bay. It's certainly appreciated by me, and I just am so genuinely thankful for the work that staff have done to identify opportunities that we can invest in the community so that we can make it safer and more effective. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Councillor Hill. Back to second round. So Councillor Devine.
Thank you, Chair. So I've got one question on, I like to say it, vibration remediation. So there's a rock band. So there's a line item for my ward on some vibration remediation work on baseline between Xena and Farland. And below the line is another vibration mediation project for view mount between Fisher and Maryvale. And the reason I just want to raise the question, the one that is below the line, much longer stretch of road than the one that is above the line. But I can tell you, so even from the campaign, when the first time I knocked on doors on view mount, we thought it was, you know, 1 or 2 cranky people saying, the streets, my house vibrates. We're like, oh yeah, sure, your house vibrates. Go to the next door. My house vibrates. Go to the next door. You get where I'm going. Like there was an entire block where everybody said, you've got to come in and hear how my house vibrates. My point is, we've never heard a thing from anybody on baseline. Of course, on one side is just wheat and they don't complain. But on the side where residents live, we've never heard a thing about it. So my question is, one project is above the line, one project is below. I'm sure the one below the line, much longer road, much costlier. But are there like clearly established criteria whereby one is put above the line and one is below?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is a new program that was introduced last year.
Oh.
And so the criteria are based on the feedback that we had and our difficulty in being able to address challenges that residents were bringing to us. And really, we had no money to be able to address it. So this is a relatively new program. I'd be happy to share with you the background on the calls that we have and the criteria. But yes, we definitely have calls for service to create that. But I'd be happy to provide you with more detail.
We can definitely talk about that later. Thank you very much. For my next range of questions, I just want to go back onto traffic safety and to talk about, you know, specific tools of it. And I'm going to follow up on the line of questioning that my colleague, Councillor Johnson, raised on the issue of traffic lights. And I can, the amount of emails that we get and the amount of time we spend on casework of trying to address, you know, getting a traffic light repaired, or why can't there be a traffic light installed here? It's quite disproportionate to many other things. And I still am a believer that when it comes to increasing our residents' sense of public safety, if not their actual public safety, that we get far more bang for our buck with lighting than we get with, you know, why can't you put more cops here? I think we can achieve that safety through lighting to a certain extent. And it certainly is distressing to me to hear that there's no budget for new traffic lights unless they're part of the road safety action plan. And as part of the road safety action plan, only if there's a clearly delineated safety issue. But I think Councillor Johnson and I and anybody in the established wards would argue on residential streets where there is no sidewalk, there is inherently a safety issue. I can only tell you that when I drive from, let's say, Craig Henry Drive, which is well lit, onto a side street, that's how you're getting your 30-kilometer-per-hour zone, because right away I'm terrified to drive at speed. And so can I, this is more a comment than a question, I suppose, but can I assume that if there's only, I mean, so like literally one of the hardest issues we face is getting broken traffic lights repaired. And we have email threads that go on for 4 or 5 months. And there's always different issues about why it can't be fixed, but all it means to the resident, and it seems like the most basic thing that we should be able to make sure that that traffic light is working. We don't need pilot projects for that. We just need to make sure that there's enough FTEs or something there. But I would like to strongly urge that if we can be steering new traffic light investments when there's a clearly delineated safety need as per the road safety action plan, that the lack of a sidewalk would be part of that foundation. So that's just a comment. I'll go to a question. I remember hearing in the presentation, you were saying that there will be budget for an additional 10 crossing guards. I think that was the figure I heard. I'm very happy to hear that. What's the demand for new crossing guards?
We usually get between 40 and 60 requests per year for crossing guards. And so we evaluate based on the council approved warrant process that was approved a few years ago. If the location meets the warrant and depending on the type of crossing, so if it's a traffic light, it looks a little different. It looks at conflicts and risk of that versus a mid-block crossing where it's more into gaps and crossing time. So based on if it meets the warrants, then it's recommended. I think in 2023 we had 9 or 10 locations that met the warrants and they were fully funded. So we get the requests anytime between now and usually the end of March, and we'll do the studies in early May to mid-June, just because you don't want to do them now, because again, in the winter, not as many people are walking, and versus the spring where you're going to get more of a likelihood of the kids going and walking to school or biking to school. So that's how we operate that program.
Oh, and I guess my question, so thank you for clarifying that. The demand may be X, but the amount of warranted ones, I assume, will be less than X. So I guess my question is, if we're allocating budget for 10 new crossing guards, how many of the demand were warranted? Like, what percentage of warranted crossing guards are we going to be able to budget for this year?
So we've used 10 as sort of an average. That's sort of what we've seen over the last few years now. Back in 2018, 2019, OSTA changed the sort of busing where they stopped busing kids within a certain distance, and we saw a spike. I mean, there's, I think 1 year we had 23 or 24. And so although we had only budgeted for 10, there was a motion that was brought at committee and approved at council to fund those locations right away versus waiting for the next couple of years. So again, last year, like I said, we had 9 or 10, so we were sort of where we're at. And if we see that next year we're over that, then we would have discussions with councillors in terms of how do we approach moving forward with that. So.
Thank you. Chair, I have one more question, but I would be remiss if I didn't thank you, Phil, and your team, because even on the issue of traffic safety when it comes to intersections, and Councillor Hill was referring to an incident in his ward, your office has been fantastic and very prompt in working with my team in addressing the incident that happened several weeks ago at the intersection of Merivale and Viewmount. And I very much appreciate how quickly you were able to implement instantaneous enhancements. And I know that I'm going to be working with your team to look at some longer term enhancements over the little while. My last question is on the issue of pedestrian crossing guards. Not pedestrian crossing guards, PXO, pedestrian crosswalks. Quentin, I think I heard you say that there was $557,000 allocated to PXOs, but perhaps it was you, Phil. And I'm not sure if that $557,000 was new money or if that's the total budget. But I suppose my question is, how many pedestrian crosswalks can you get with $557,000?
It depends on what you need. So if it's a type D, which is just the sign, it's a lot less than if you need to put the flashing lights on the overhead sign. So we've done most of the ones that are just the signs because when this program started in 2016, we wanted to sort of get as many as we could. So we focused on those. So now we're more in the more expensive ones in terms of we're talking anywhere from 50 to 120, 130,000. Okay. It just depends if what roadway modifications or sidewalk modifications are required. Because the device itself, if you weren't to look at the civil work with the flashing lights, is somewhere between $30,000 and $40,000. So again, we've got some money in that. We do have there is a gap in terms of the funding, but we are supplementing with some funding through the road safety action plan as well. So that we can try to get all of the warranted ones installed as soon as possible. And we continue to review locations and others come up and we prioritize based on the safety of the roadway.
All right. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Councillor Lowe.
Thank you, Chair. I kind of want to build on some of the conversations that's been going on so far as and some new questions as well. So the statistics or the information rather that you shared about the streetlights being hit and mostly hit and run is interesting because I think I had a few of those in my ward and I've seen some in along Woodruff on my commute as well. Has it been so bad that has any sort of conversation been triggered where you're thinking about future posts being in ground instead of the breakaway posts that we currently use?
Yeah, we use the breakaway posts because they're the safest ones in terms of when it does get hit. So basically they fall over, which is what we want from a safety perspective, because if they were in ground where they were solid, then the damage would go to the vehicle versus the pole. So it takes away that, whenever a object gets hit, there's acceleration and if the post doesn't take it, the car will take it, which then would mean that you probably have people in those vehicles hurt more often. So the way they're designed, they break away, they fall over. Like I said, usually people aren't injured when they just hit one streetlight pole. And that's why a lot of the times they just leave. They don't stick around, unfortunately, because if they stuck around, the police would go and then we'd get there. So our maintenance provider arrives. A lot of times we get complaints saying there's a pole down, and when we get there, no one's there. So we can't, that's different than a traffic signal, because with the traffic signal, when it gets hit, the lights go out and we get called pretty quickly to fix those, and the car usually can't leave as well. So.
Yeah, so I know it is a weird balance of protecting our assets or making sure our assets survive versus human life. So yeah, okay, that's thanks for that answer. The the next question is we switched to I think it's called MMA road paint when the weather allows us to apply it. And something I've been noticing is that whenever that paint is used, I don't know if it has a longer drying time or something, but there are a lot of tire marks that go over them, and it spreads the lines. A lot of our dash lines become solid lines because of it. Is there anything to kind of address that, to make sure, like, have a crew kind of lag behind or something to allow it to dry? And what is the drying time of MMA paint compared to what we usually use?
Yeah, I don't have the exact time. I know it's longer. I can get that for you from my team. I mean, what we try to do is, we try to secure the area. It's difficult because it's the big paint truck that goes. So we tend to have a vehicle behind it. And those big paint trucks with the MMA are going really slow. They're going like 20, 25 kilometers an hour because it takes a little longer for them to go down the road because of the paint. What happens is sometimes motors just get frustrated and they don't want to wait. And then they go over the lines when we really don't want them to. So it's sort of that trying to get that balance in terms of being able to be productive and get the road. But I think we observe those things, and I noticed there was something on Woodruff there just near Hunt Club after they had just painted the road. So it's something that we're going to take back. And is there better ways of us either securing the area for the longer time, or maybe doing, like, we usually do those things overnight when there's not as much traffic, but maybe there's areas where we have to find another time. Maybe it's a little later in the night. So maybe I guess this could have happened at 10 or 11 at night. Maybe wait till 2 or 3 in the morning when the likelihood of traffic being there is a lot less. So those kind of things that we'll look at as we move forward.
Okay, I can tell you 2 or 3 is after the racing is done. So the next question is then what exactly are we looking at in the service review of like finding the balance between NTC and TTC? Are we looking to combine the programs, cancel one?
Well, I don't think we have any prejudged sort of what the outcome is. It's basically looking at what, how both programs work. Are there efficiencies? I mean, we work very closely with those teams, so we try not to duplicate, so that we're not gonna, if we know that a road's getting, gonna have permanent traffic calmings, we're not gonna go in and put some temporary things like that. But it's trying to see if there's ways to be a little more effective. So we're just starting that work in the next few weeks. And the first bit is basically saying, okay, what are all the different processes that both programs have? And then from that, we can sort of see, is there alignments in certain things, and how can we address that so that we can be more efficient with how we roll out the 2 programs.
Okay, thank you. No, I echo some of the comments earlier where my ward is all built out and a lot of these TTC and or NTC investments are kind of one and done, right? And I think there, whatever we come up with in the future, I think there could be some benefit to like one-time surges in investment so that we can also reduce. I feel like we can also reduce mobilization costs. Of course, the overall cost to be higher, but that's something that that we can consider in the future. The last question I have, Tim, it's the last question. So sometimes I see, especially in newer intersections, I see like when new traffic signals are installed, personally, at least, I think we're using a lot of posts. And I know that there are redundancies where we do have to kind of install them in a certain way, but there are some posts that at least I feel like I'm using Longfields and Highbury Park as an example, right? It's 2 residential streets, 3 lanes and 3 lanes total on each approach. And there are 14 posts in that intersection. And looking at some of them, it's like, why couldn't we have just put an arm attached and a slightly longer arm onto one of the existing posts instead of having so many posts in the ground? I don't know if that I don't know if that is something that can be kind of looked at properly for cost savings.
Yeah, I mean, we look at that. We try to minimize the number of posts. Some of the challenge we have is those we need to ensure that they're AOD compliant. So for example, a pole has to be 1.5 meters from the edge of the sidewalk. So if you've got a wider sidewalk area, then you need to potentially put 2 poles, where in the past we would have put 1 in the middle. You got to put 2 on each side. So we're not out there putting more posts than we need, because from our perspective, it's another object that can get hit. So we're trying to minimize that. So I mean, specific to that location, I don't have the details, but I'd be happy to sit down with you to go with our design team to explain why those were. If we have medians, we need to put a post in the median of the road and things like that. So that, like I said, can add things up pretty quickly if need be.
Yeah, no, I understand there's some places where you have to, right? It's just whatever. We can talk about specifics at that location in the future, but it's installed, whatever. And then kind of further to that, it's the same with regular signposts, right? Like for example, one of my roundabouts, in one of the roundabouts in my ward, there are at least 7 signposts per exit. You multiply that by 4, that's 28 signposts in one roundabout. At least 2 or 3 of those signposts are like 30 centimeters apart from each other as well. So like, do we just go by like a diagram of whatever's drawn out? Do we ever think, oh, we can put these 2 signs together and save a post? I know it's just 1 post, but multiply it across the whole city. Do we ever do that, some sort of process at all, or is that just based on whatever drawing is out there?
No, again, similar to the signals, we try to minimize the number of posts. I mean, at roundabouts, it can be a challenge because there's a lot of regulatory signs. So we have the PXO signs, right? And we can't and then we have the yield signs. So they may be fairly close together, but we can't have the 2 signs on 1 post. But if we can, like I know in other areas where we'll have no parking or parking permitted, and we could put a sign on 2 signs on that with 2 different messages. But again, it's with the roundabout because of the crossings, and when PXOs were permitted to be used at roundabouts, that did increase the number. But again, you need to have a sign for every crossing, right? So and it can become challenging if you have wider sidewalks, because then you can't use the same sign for the 2 directions. So again, we try to minimize the number of signs, but sometimes it still ends up with a lot.
Yeah, no, I understand. There's some you have to, but then sometimes just look at it like that could have been, whatever. Okay, thanks.
All right, the Save a Post program. Thank you, Councillor Lowe. Councillor Kavanaugh.
Thank you, Chair. When I heard about paint, it just reminded me of something that was an ongoing issue, and that is murals on roads that are used as traffic calming. And community associations love them. And I'm trying to get some feedback on, how we can make it more smooth for community associations to apply for them and have some direction. For example, sometimes they don't use the right kind of paint, and we have issues. And they don't know who to go to. We don't know where to send them. They're becoming more popular. It's a real community building exercise because a whole bunch of people come out and work on it. And it's beautiful kind of traffic calming. can we have some more coordination? Like, is that been allocated?
Yeah, I mean, I think, I mean, we've done a few in the past. I mean, the one thing with where we focus is more local to local streets, because one of the challenges is we don't want these beautiful murals on the road to start to become a distraction for motorists, because we want them to be focused on the road versus on the murals. So I think it's working with your specialist to start the conversation, and we're more than happy in terms of talking the types of paint. The challenge is as you get more into the type of street paints, then it's not really, I don't think we want the community to do that just because of the type of paint that's used, and we do a lot of training, and there's requirements for the street paint that we do use. And again, it depends on how long. Some folks who use chocolate, they just want it there for the weekend, others want it for a longer period of time. So I think it's just maybe start with the specialist having discussion as to what the goals are, and then we can go from there and work with your office to get something done.
Thank you. So we'd like to have, it'd be great to have a designated person to go to, because just to talk it over, for example, if it's not an appropriate street to have it because it's too busy or whatever.
Yeah.
But generally speaking, it seems, like it's obviously traffic calming, so there's some traffic, but just even coordinating the closing off and everything else. So there's a one-stop shop to help people if we can have that.
I would suggest maybe, like I said, the specialist, so I think for you it's Sean, start with him, and then he can ensure that he's coordinating so that if we need to close roads, that can be done through special events folks. So let us do the work, and he can help coordinate all that.
Okay, thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Councillor. Seeing no further questions of staff, I'll just provide some light commentary for about 10 minutes because we're paid by the word, apparently. No, I'm just kidding. So that being said, I did pick up on a couple of quick things that I think is very important. The appreciation of staff. We understand this is the workhorse department of the city. It's what people expect and you guys deliver. So I want to thank you for that. When it comes to things like, I also heard Councillor Devine mention the rumbling. We live in the land of Leda clay in a lot of the east end of the city. So resetting storm grates and things like that in the ironworks department. I don't want to get them too busy, but those are areas of focus that we can talk offline about too, because that's always been problematic and something we deal with. Traffic calming. Imagine in 2012, former Councillor Rainer Blois and I at this very committee table spitballed the idea of starting the traffic calming measure, and it was a campaign promise by former Mayor Watson in 2014 and started the ball rolling at that point. And I think that was a good idea. I'm glad we're still continuing on. There's much demand for it. I always used to brag I spent the most of all on traffic calming. And it seems that everybody wants to do the same now, which is terrific news. When it comes to the speed reductions, we talked heavily about this, that we want to see localized streets reduced in speed, but it takes time. And we're moving from the inner to the outer, and we saw quite a bit of the inner before. Outer urban, we're getting there, and of course the suburbs on those localized streets. So I want to thank staff for working so closely with us. And one other thing that I had noted was in regards to bike lanes, you're not adverse to trying new things. I remember when I came to you a while ago about some kind of permanent style infrastructure to try out. And I think we've seen some success on Elgin Street, where we've put in the delineators that are winter proven for cycling, and all these programs. We keep advancing ourselves. We're not just playing the same game over and over. We're always trying to look at more road safety. So on that note, I do want to thank you. Now, Vice Chair Kitts does have the roadmap motion. I didn't really hear any big dissents on items. Do people feel the need to go through every item or carry the roadmap motion as it is? Carried. Thank you. Thank you very much. Now, so on that,
Chair.
Sorry, Councillor Luloff, your camera is off. I apologize.
No problem, Chair. I'll vote for the roadmap in its entirety, but we'll dissent on capital. Thank you.
On capital, okay. Oh, and Councillor Kitts. Okay, duly noted. Thank you very much, everybody, on that item. Very successful budget. On that note, I did miss one thing. Rosa keeps poking me when we were doing the agenda clearing in regards to the IPD, item 11, number 3. Are the IPDs received? Sorry about that. I skipped it over. I was anxious. Great, thank you. So we'll go to the final remaining item on the agenda today. At this, we don't usually do this, but we had a request from, thank you very much, staff. Really appreciate it. Thank you very much. I did have a request for people to come speak collectively in a group of 4. Is that the only 4 we have today, Rosa? So I'd ask all 4 to come forward. I had a great conversation with them in the elevator, and that is related to the Nesbit Street encroachment agreement. So we'll get you to come forward. Please come sit up at the microphones here. The whole table is yours. And we typically don't bulk them together, but I've spoken with Councillor Kavanagh, and we're looking at actually having, yep, please have a seat. Having all 4 of you guys speak. You have typically 5 minutes per individual, but you can mix and match and do whatever you want for up to maximum of 20 minutes.
Chair, are we going to hear from staff as well? Staff have a presentation as well.
If that's the request that you have, did you want that presentation in advance? I thought we discussed this yesterday.
Well, since they're here, maybe we'll get it after.
Okay, sounds good. Great. Maybe it'll just be a couple of seconds as we pull up your presentation. But maybe we'll take this opportunity, if we can go from this side to this side, to introduce yourselves.
Yeah, I'm Seamus Fleming. I'm a student at Carleton University in International Affairs, and I work at the local provincial MPP office.
Great. Madame?
My name is Trudy Hall, and I am the current president of the Crystal Bay Community Association. I'm Caroline Fitzpatrick, longtime resident of Crystal Bay.
And I'm Janelle McInnes, and I am the vice president of the Crystal Bay Community Association.
Wonderful. So at this point, we've loaded the presentation. You can go up to a maximum of 20 minutes. Don't feel you have to, but the presentation's loaded. You can speak in whatever order you wish. Please proceed.
Thank you for receiving our delegation this morning. My name is Seamus Fleming. I'm a university student and live in Crystal Bay. I am here with members of the River Access Committee of the Crystal Bay Community Association. For decades, our residents have been stewards of the 5 small waterfront public accesses in the areas of Crystal Bay. This stewardship of the accesses for future generations of Ottawa residents is particularly important to me. Our residents have continued to and have been solidly supportive of the efforts and proposals of our committee. They have also overwhelmingly voted the right for the committee to represent our community's river access goals and guiding principles and representations to the city. So instead of listening to numerous individual delegations, we are the community delegation regarding the Nesbit public waterfront access area. We hope that we can carry the presence and weight of many resident delegations of all ages. The issue. Next slide, please. Thank you. The Nesbit encroachment area is part of valuable recreational waterfront public property. The encroachment deters public use because of the current vegetation and lack of signage, makes it appear to be private property. Approval of this encroachment agreement could set a negative precedent and put similar vulnerable areas at risk. Next slide. Thanks. Our goal here today is to convince you that it is in the public interest to vote against this encroachment agreement and support the community's 4-point compromise proposal, which we will present to you shortly. This would set a positive precedent and would support the city's intent in its 2006 report to recognize and protect public waterfront areas from encroachment. This would also send a positive message to other community groups who advocate for protection of other vulnerable natural areas which have important public uses. We will talk more about this in the 2006 report in the next slide. Next slide. Oh, perfect. Okay, our proposal relies heavily on the city's 2006 strategy report, referred to as City's Water Access Policy, in the right-of-way Nesbit Street encroachment agreement. The full title of this report is A Strategy to Recognize and Protect the Public Waterfront Recreational Access Function of Selected Road Allowances on the Ottawa Rideau Rivers. This report emphasized that these waterfront areas were not simply accesses to the river, but rather fulfilled an important recreational purpose for Ottawa residents. In this report, the city recognized that there are comparatively few areas which the public can use for free access to the Ottawa River. Our compromise argument is also based on the many, many decades of combined community memory and engagement in preserving these small areas as small recreational green space with a much appreciated quality of life value. The community has been gaining experience in managing the environmental issues and the recreational use of the accesses. Next slide.
Again, thank you for hearing our delegation this morning. This slide highlights for members of the committee and city residents joining today what the strategy report said. You should take note of the language the report uses. Words like work in partnership and consultation with the community in which the access is located. The intention to define permitted uses to support the recreational function of these public areas. The intention to manage the accesses as waterfront access points for recreational purposes. And in fact, Crystal Bay accesses were singled out as valuable waterfront areas to be protected from encroachment. The report suggested responsibility for establishing a balance between a defined recreational use and the protection and enhancement of the area. Our community celebrated these words and believed that we finally had significant backing from the city for our stewardship of these areas. Next slide, please. There has unfortunately been much confusion in the community regarding the Nesbit encroachment. This lack of clarity by the city can often lead to bad feelings in a neighborhood, especially if an issue has been unresolved for many years. However, we want to move forward in a positive and consultative way. We are simply looking to find a creative solution that works for everyone. So we are suggesting a 4-point compromise, which 1, allows recreational use of the encroached area. 2, provides accessibility for mobility compromised individuals. 3, aligns with the applicable right-of-way bylaws. And 4, creates a plan for the gradual transition from introduced thorny, inhospitable vegetation to native riparian vegetation that is user-friendly, that increases riparian biodiversity and requires no maintenance. The presentation will also address the statements and assumptions made in the staff report. Next slide, please. We do, however, want to make something very clear at the outset. We are not asking that the existing stone retaining walls be removed. This is frankly a red herring here and distracts everyone from finding a compromise solution. So please disregard the numerous references in the staff report to retaining walls, engineering studies and flood mitigation, and climate, environmental, and risk management implications. The community is also not asking for the sudden catastrophic removal of vegetation, but is asking for an incremental and ecologically responsible transition away from the current non-riparian thorny plants in the encroached area to a native riparian vegetation that would not exclude recreational use of the area. Next slide, please. Our first point is to make sure that the public is able to make or have recreational use of the encroached area. The current mix of introduced prickly vegetation prevents that use by members of the public. In the next slide, you will see the huge change in overgrown vegetation over 11 years and how it impedes and strongly discourages public access to the area. As you can see in the left photo on the next slide, please. 11 years ago, there was much more open access to the encroached area and it was usable. But now, after 11 years of growth, that same vegetation creates both a physical thorny barrier and an unwelcoming visual and psychological barrier to the use of the encroached area by the public. The appearance is that of private property. There has been uncertainty and confusion as to who was responsible for maintaining the encroachment area and what the community was permitted to prune in our annual spring community beach cleanups and removal of invasives. Prickly ground cover plants have spread over boulders and onto the beach, restricting foot traffic and further reducing seating area, but the city has recently warned residents not to cut back or touch any of this. Next slide, please. To orient you to this slide, the river is at the top and the middle larger bit is the beach area. It is important to be aware of how large the encroached area is, which is shown in pink here. It is approximately 1/3 of the total area of the public access, outlined in yellow. The current inhospitable encroaching vegetation, for example, rose bushes and evergreens, remove approximately 1/3 of the recreational use of the public waterfront area.
Thank you for hearing our delegation today. As I said, my name is Caroline Fitzpatrick. I have lived in Crystal Bay since 1978. Myself, my husband, my children, and later my grandchildren have all enjoyed access and the use of the beach and the river for sailing, swimming, looking, watching, thinking. To summarize point one, our compromise solution proposes a gradual transition from the unwelcoming overgrown vegetation to a mix of native riparian plants, which will stabilize the soil, survive flooding, help mitigate erosion, add riparian biodiversity, and create a usable recreational area. This would enhance the use of this area by the public, as it has historically been used. We will speak more of this in point 4. Also, clear signage demarcating the city and private property line, which was already promised by the city, but is still pending, contrary to the assertions in the staff report. This would clarify the boundaries of the public access and reduce confusion, and people would feel more comfortable knowing that they were allowed to use the public area. Next slide, please. Point 2, providing accessibility for mobility compromised individuals. Ironically, the public access area is not very accessible by the public. The encroached area is the only flat and firm part of the public access and the only part which would be easily accessible to people with compromised mobility. The loss of this area has had a significant negative impact on the community. Next slide, please. To illustrate the change in accessibility, you can see the area in red, which was the encroached land at the southeast corner of the public access in 1991. This area was historically very accessible with low ground cover, a firmer footing than the sandy beach area, and a smooth and open transition from the street. It was used by windsurfers to rig and dry their sails, and for families to picnic and children to play and other recreational activities. This is no longer possible. As you can see in the photo on the right, that by 2019, the area is covered with thorny bushes and evergreens and is no longer easily accessible to the public. For the Nesbit access, the city could send its residents the message that city-owned properties are accessible to all, regardless of ability, by controlling the introduced vegetation as an immediate measure, followed by responsibly and gradually transitioning to riparian vegetation, and by establishing easy access to the encroached area from the road. The city did a beautiful job making our local park, Barrymullen Park, accessible. Let's do it here too. Thank you.
Next slide, please. Thank you for receiving our delegation again. Point number 3 is ensuring that existing vegetation in this area complies with city bylaws. Here, we want to address another of the concerns listed in this staff report, which is the loss of shade tree canopy. This is a non-existent concern because, as you can see in this and the previous photos, there's no significant tree canopy on the encroached land. The deciduous tree in the far background is on the property to the east of the access. With respect to the right-of-way bylaws, the vegetation that is present on the encroachment is higher than the maximum height in the new right-of-way bylaw. Enforcing the bylaw in this case would be an important first step in returning the area to recreational use. While the program for transition proceeds gradually, the width of the current overgrown prickly vegetation should be reduced to allow some use and accessibility of the encroached area by the public in the early days of the transition. Next slide, please. Point 4 is about creating a plan for an ecologically responsible transition from introduced thorny vegetation to native riparian plants. Our community already has a successful track record of working with the RVCA at other public river accesses in the neighborhood to gradually remove invasive species that have moved in after sudden major man-made disruptions to vegetation and soil, to reestablish native riparian vegetation, and to mitigate further erosion as much as possible. Let me emphasize that in working with the RVCA, we have learned that an ecologically responsible transition can be done in a gradual, intentional, consultative way. Next slide, please. Riparian vegetation has evolved and survived for millennia. It stabilizes shorelines, mitigates erosion damage, and increases biodiversity. More importantly, it also requires no ongoing city maintenance. Our community is committed to collaborating with the city, the RVCA, and the abutting property owner to create an ecologically responsible and sustainable plan to transition away from introduced thorny vegetation to native riparian vegetation. Next slide, please. To summarize, this plan addresses environment, climate, and risk management implications that were raised by the staff report. This plan also addresses important accessibility implications, which were not raised in the staff report. In a nutshell, this plan will positively accomplish the goals of all the parties and will ensure no increased risk of flooding and will help mitigate erosion, no ongoing expenditure of city funds, privacy for the abutting property owner, accessibility of the encroached area by all members of the public, including those with mobility challenges, and clear demarcation of the property line. Next slide, please. In conclusion, the CBCA is asking that the committee vote against the encroachment and approve our 4-point compromise proposal to ensure that the priorities of the city, the Crystal Bay community, the RVCA, the abutting property owner, and the wider community of recreational users of this public access beach, including those with mobility challenges. And all are given equal weight and are accommodated in a fair compromise solution. Next slide. Thank you, and we'll take any questions.
Very well timed and well put together delegation. I appreciate that. So this is a report that we're looking to receive or not. So at this point, I'm looking at questions from committee or non-committee members. Teresa, Councillor Kavanaugh, I apologize.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much for all the time you put into this and for making a delegation today. You had a long wait and I appreciate that. We'll be asking questions to staff as well to raise some of the points you've put forward. It strikes me that the biggest concern was regarding thorny bushes. Is that what I'm getting from your presentation?
Oh, sorry. The current vegetation essentially excludes use of the area for pretty much any purpose. And the appearance basically discourages people from using it as well, because it really does look like private property instead of river edge space that's public.
Okay. Thank you.
Councillor Troster.
Thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate your care and all the work you put into your presentation. I'm just a little bit confused though, because is this not private property? Did city staff not determine that this is private property? So you're seeking the opportunity to impact the landscaping on the property so that it provides more access to the public beach?
Correct. You hit the point. It looks like private property. And so we want it returned to more a natural space like it used to be, with riparian vegetation that would naturally be there.
But it's not that it appears private property. The encroachment is private property. Is this what city staff?
It's public. It's public beach.
But the encroachment is part of the private property of the person.
No, the encroachment is public property. It looks like private property. It has the appearance of private property. So we want signage to go up that shows residents where the boundary line is and what part of the public area can be used by the public. The problem is you really can't use this encroached area because it's full of large thorny plants and evergreens that are also very prickly. And there's no space. It's full of this type of vegetation.
So you're seeking for the private property owner to change the vegetation on their part of the property so it doesn't encroach on the public?
We're seeking what's the word I'm looking for? A collaborative approach to environmentally responsibly changing the current vegetation to a native riparian vegetation where people can actually move onto this and use this land.
Okay, I'm just trying to understand where you're coming from, and I know staff is going to
totally
give their presentation
appreciate it.
after. So, but the dispute is still about whether a particular piece of land is private property or public property.
There's no dispute. This has been recognized as an encroached area, encroaching on public property.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that.
Great. Thank you. And seeing no further questions, we had a great little chat in the elevator. I grew up in Constance Bay, so I know what water access points are and versus beaches and how prickly these things get on occasion. So we're going to seek some clarity from staff that have been working hard on this. And I believe we have a representative from the RVCA here as well to answer some of those questions and see if there's some things that can be done, what's within our purview and what is not. We've been working very closely with your counselor as well. And at this point, I thank you for coming out and making your presentation. And at this point, I'll get staff to come forward. I believe there's a quick slide deck that Councillor Kavanaugh has asked to be added in just to review the matter. And then we'll go to questions to staff. So thank you for coming out today.
Thank you.
Chair, I just wanted to confirm that there's no additional public delegates. No, okay.
That's correct. It's
you.
you're the final show. So if you want to just run through the slides based on some of what you've heard, and then we can go to questions to staff and determine if we received this report today. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Just to introduce ourselves, I'm Mark Young, the Program Manager of Public Realm and Urban Design. We also deal with right-of-way issues that are above grade. So Laurier DiNardo is our coordinator for right-of-way on our team. And I'm also joined by Eric Lalonde from the RVCA. So here to answer any questions you might have. We'll quickly just give you a quick, some additional, and hopefully answer some of the questions that were brought up by Councillor Troster. So next slide, please. So just to share with you just a little bit of the location. This is located at the west end of Nesbit Street. It is a right-of-way. Water access. It is solely located within the 100-year floodplain. So the area you see is located in front of private residential property indicated as 2 Nesbit Street. They do own a portion of land on the, I guess you would say, the eastern edge of the right-of-way, which extends to the water. Next slide, please. So this is a survey that was prepared illustrating the areas of encroachment. So this survey also illustrates the area within private ownership on the eastern side or to the right of this image. So the area is approximately 20% of the water access and features 2 stone retaining walls that are used for flood mitigation. There's some existing rugosa rose bushes, some flagstone walkway, and 2 juniper trees within this area. Next slide, please. Here's some images. This issue was brought to our attention in 2020. You'll see here a sign on private property indicating the boundary of private property. You'll also see a bollard that was installed to further delineate the edge of the beach access. And there is also signage on the western edge of the water access, which has a water access logo that's used at all of our water access points in the city. So just to flag also, there are an additional bollard that is to be installed pending decision here today. Next slide, please. I'll turn it over now to Laurier DiNardo to speak to our water access and how we review these encroachments and the decision that was made in this instance.
Thank you. So there has been some discussion today about beach versus water access. So I think that's a really good place for us to start and actually explaining what we mean by water access. There was a report in 2006, and it was identified there are approximately 326 publicly accessible waterfront properties on Ottawa and Rideau rivers. And of those 326, approximately 192 are road allowances within the right-of-way. The intention of these access points is to ensure the Ottawa River remains accessible to the public. They have basic public access, limited to no amenities, and the intended activities for these water accesses include things as boating, swimming, and fishing. These water accesses, they also align with the city's official plan to ensure that the shoreline of the Ottawa River remains accessible to all. And not all accesses are equal. As Chair would know, up in Constance Bay and throughout the city, some of these accesses offer things such as boat launches, where others are truly meant to kind of walk in, drag your canoe, and get out onto the river. Next slide, please. So a lot of time has been spent with the community association, with internal stakeholders, external stakeholders such as the RVCA on the decision on the existing encroachments that we're here discussing today. So the decision that city staff arrived at was we would install bollards to delineate the private versus public space. We do agree there was some confusion about the public versus private, and we felt this was the most appropriate, easiest way to delineate so that the public could understand they do have the ability to access the space and enjoy the space. We did decide that the existing landscape features were to remain, but that no further landscape features would be permitted within the space.
We also have worked with the owners of 2 Nesbit that they would actually have to enter into a formal agreement with the city of Ottawa. This would be an encroachment agreement, which are permitted through the provisions of the encroachment bylaw. And what this means is that this agreement would be registered on title. It is a standard practice that we do citywide. We do permit encroachments throughout the city for various reasons. And within this agreement, we can also address the ongoing maintenance requirements so that we can address the concerns about bushes being overgrown, that the public couldn't potentially walk through the flagstone path. We can put those provisions within the agreement and hold the agreement holder accountable to maintain those maintenance activities. Next slide, please. So we do have rationale for our decision. It's not something that we've taken lightly. We've looked at everything historical versus current day. And as city staff, we do believe that the bollards and the signage do address the concerns of what is public versus private property within this area. Beautification of city right-of-ways is supported across the city. Prior to the update of the use and care of roads bylaw for beautification, we have been working with different groups trying to support beautification requests within the right-of-way. So we feel this does align with that initiative. The subject landscape features and rocks are well established. They have been here for at least 20 years. And the rock wall and landscaping do not impede the public's use of the water access at this location, which was really critical for us because we want to ensure that we align with the intention of the water access report. So as you can see, there was, when we first arrived on site back in 2020, there was a log going across the sandy area of the water access. So we did actually have that removed because we did not want people thinking that this was a barrier that they could not access the space. The retaining wall and landscaping do not interfere with city operations. This is something that's really important for us when we actually do review encroachment requests across the city. First question I always go to my my colleagues to see, is this going to interfere with city operations? Because that's pretty much a deal breaker for us. And in this situation, we've been advised the current encroachments will not impede or interfere with current city operations or infrastructure. And the abutting owners have committed to enter into the formal agreement with the city. Next slide, please. And the last piece for us in making this decision, we did work quite closely with Eric Lalonde from the RVCA. And the location of the right-of-way water access containing the subject landscape elements, and I'm basically reading verbatim what he provided because I am definitely not the subject matter expert on RVCA matters, is including large sections of Armorstone is located within the 100-year floodplain limits of the Ottawa River. As a result, any site grade alterations within the floodplain would require permitting from the Rideau Valley Conservation Authority. This would necessitate the need for extensive engineering study to ensure that flood storage is maintained and there's no increased risk of flooding and or erosion to abutting properties. It has also been indicated that alterations could result in possible erosion loss to the beach area. The Rideau Valley Conservation Authority has no concerns with the location of the existing landscape elements, including the Armorstone. And in our discussions with the RVCA, our understanding was to do the type of engineering study that would be required. We're looking at, you know, well over $10,000 to even explore an option that we don't feel is necessary because it's not interfering with people's enjoyment and use of the water access as its intended use. I believe that's all we have. And that's all we have for our presentation. So we're happy to take any questions you may have.
Great. Thank you for that. Looking around the board, Councillor Troster.
Thank you. So I just want to get a better sense of the dispute from your perspective. So your perspective is that no additional landscape changes need to happen and that the property that they're concerned about is private, not public. Is that a fair assessment?
Through you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor. That's correct. We are in support of the landscaping features that currently exist.
Okay.
We don't support any additional enhancements, but it is a right-of-way space. It's not a normal situation where most people's, your front yard is an extension of your right of way. In this particular instance, because of how the right of way dead ends, it is unique that it's definitely not a normal situation we've encountered in the past.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Kavanaugh.
Thank you very much for all the time that's been put into this. One of the concerns was about thorny bushes and changing it to native riparian vegetation. Would that have any effect on the floodplain requirements? We're not talking, the community very clearly said they're not planning to, touch the rocks, that's understood. But just they're asking for a change of vegetation, and who would be responsible for that, and what kind of decision making goes into that if what you're saying is on the right of way. I'd like an opinion from RBCA on that too. Thanks.
Just through you, Chair, Councillor. Staff have no concerns with the vegetation that is located within the right of way. As you've heard and seen in the report, none of these plant typologies were listed as part of the use and care of roads update as noxious or inappropriate for a right of way condition. And I'll turn it over to Eric as well to speak to whether the plant materials are appropriate or not based on a floodplain mitigation lens.
Yeah, through the chair, overall, the RBC has no concerns or issues with replacing plants with that maybe more appropriate for a riverine condition. The plants that are there are a little bit more ornamental, but overall, there's no concern if they're there to remain or to be replaced. We do have a list of plant species that would be more appropriate for the location if they were to be replaced. And I believe the Crystal Bay Community Association has reached out to us and is working with our shoreline program on what species would be appropriate, and we'd be happy to help support those efforts if they're deemed appropriate. But vegetation from a flood protection mitigation is usually always a good thing. We have no problem with more plantings, more vegetation, because they do provide additional measures to help attenuate flood situations. But there isn't a pressing need from our end to change what's there. But if there is a desire to move towards something that's more appropriate, we're there to support that effort.
Question is who makes the decision on the vegetation? The community association, the property owner, the city, RBCA?
Through you, Chair, as noted, we have no concerns with the vegetation typology as indicated, and are willing to enter into an encroachment agreement to recognize what's there.
And then from the RBCA's perspective, it's the property owner that would come to us if they are looking to change vegetation. So we have no say on actually enacting action on that front.
Okay, so it's not the community association, it's the property owner?
It's up to whoever is owning the property. We don't control or regulate the plant species, but we are there to support and assist with appropriate species when that action is to take place.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Long.
Thank you, Chair. So I kind of want to put this into a suburban context to help me better understand it, and perhaps some of my colleagues as well. This is kind of like, I'm looking at G-Ottawa now, and it kind of looks like a cul-de-sac. The concept of it is like a cul-de-sac, and there's a house at the end of it, and then their property just happens to do this, right? And they went and gardened in the right of way, as is now permitted. But because of the material they've used, because of the nature of the stuff they put there, it needs an encroachment agreement because there's rocks and all that stuff, the boulders.
Through you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor. Yes, that's correct. So anything that is more substantial and permanent in nature, like a retaining wall, we would put someone into a formal encroachment agreement. You will see those in other areas of the city. We even have things like stairs, anything that's more substantial. But as part of that, we are capturing the landscaping features as well in our encroachment agreement to ensure we have the maintenance and address concerns from the community.
Okay, thank you. I kind of see this as like a corner lot, and people like to cut through it, but ultimately it is the residents' right of way. So, okay, thank you.
Great. Seeing no further questions, I want to thank staff for coming out today. Again, just a reminder, Transportation Committee and Council received their support for information. Is this item received? Great, thank you. And thank you for everyone coming out today, and thanks to staff for clarifying some of those items. We have no in-camera items. Rosa, am I doing okay? So no notices of motion, no inquiries. We have no other business. We have adjournment. Our next meeting will take place January 25th, 2024.
Circle back in the new year.
Happy holidays and Merry Christmas. Absolutely. Thank you very much, everyone, for your patience today.
Thanks, Chair.